Well,
From Weezer, right? You're from Weezer? Wow. Remember from the impact TV.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our budget levy workshop today. I'm Alan Dornpest with the Tax Commission out of the Boise office.
Good. Ben Solosky. I work with Alan here at the Tax Commission in Boise.
Okay, it's really good to have everyone here, back again, some of you, I'm sure, and we'll do that in just a moment. A couple of housekeeping things to start with. Please make sure everyone has signed in, and you should have a packet of material for this afternoon's session. We'll be going through much of that material with you today, and it'll be available later online. I'm sure it'll be put online at some point, and all of that. We are recording so that we could also have an online version of the class for those who would like to, review kind of in a little more live environment. So just be aware of that. So in starting out today, I'd like to find out a little bit about who we've got in our audience today. One thing I keep forgetting, so I'll do it first this time, is how many of you have not been to one of these sessions in previous years? Okay, so we've got several new folks. Welcome. And please don't hesitate to stop us and ask questions during our program. These programs are for you. And we want to take advantage of every opportunity we have to try to answer as many of your questions as we can. If we don't get to all of your questions today, or you don't think of it, you think of one, 2 weeks later or whatever, contact us. We will get back to you just as soon as we can. This is our contact information for myself and for Ben, and we pride ourselves in responding to you, and we'll just try to do so as expeditiously as possible. So beyond that, how many of you represent counties this afternoon? County folks, okay. We have some other sessions, so hopefully we'll fill in at the other sessions. How about cities? Okay, a few of our cities in the region. Good, thank you. We've had good attendance around the state. We've done several of these now. This week we'll wrap up our program. So we've done North, and we've done East Idaho, and we've had quite a few cities in attendance. I might mention for cities, your associate. I did a talk with from your association a couple of weeks ago, and they recorded that. It's not only on budget and levy, but it's more on general tax policy. And if you're interested, I believe that you should contact them and about availability of that video. How about fire districts? That seems to be, wow, it may be a record, okay? And thank you. It's true, we had quite a bit of law change regarding fire districts this year. A lot of years I get up here and say, well, not much new to report in legislation, but certainly for fire districts this year and a few others, there is a lot new to report. So we'll try to answer your questions and talk about issues that may be very germane. I know some of the impetus for some of the legislative changes came right out of this region. So certainly anything you'd like to share on that would be very helpful. How about highway districts? The highway districts today, no. Library districts. Okay, and again, it's an area of some law changes this year. A lot of these law changes have to do with what happens when districts change boundaries and consolidate and do things of that nature, but we'll talk more about that in a little while. And how about ambulance districts? None of those here, okay. And sewer and water districts. Okay, which one? Fayette Lakes, okay, great, thank you. And let's see, who am I forgetting? Abatement districts? No, cemetery districts. Okay, cemetery districts, okay, which cemetery district? Weezer? Okay, great, thank you. And I don't know any of the districts that I've missed. Yes. Hospital district, okay, which one? McCall Hospital, okay, very good. Okay, there's a community college district here too, do we have them? No, not today. Well, oh, are you with the,
Hospital district,
which one?
Horseshoe Bend.
Oh, Horseshoe Bend Hospital District, okay, great, thank you. Okay, any other districts I've missed? Yes,
Recreation district,
oh, Recreation District, how could I forget? Which one?
Middleton.
Middleton, okay, thank you very much, okay. We also have some tax commission folks here today, so let's just go and do a little bit of introductions. Jared?
Claire Rudd with the Tax Commission. I work with operating property.
Yeah, that's the property like public utilities and railroads and properties of that nature that we assess. We'll talk a little more about that. Thank you. Matt?
Matt Shriver with the AG's office, signed the text.
Okay, and Christina?
Christina Nelson, Matt's coworker.
Okay, and Commissioner Woods is here with us today. Commissioner?
I'm Paul Woods. I'm a commissioner with oversight for property tax.
Okay, thank you, Garen.
Aaron Evans with property tax on tax policy. I work with Al.
Okay, very good. I don't know, did I miss anybody? Okay, all right, good, thank you very much. So we do, also one other thing I want to say getting started is that we do have a pretty full program. And so, let's see, this one's planned to go to 4:30, is that correct? And so I do hope you'll be able to stay through that. We understand sometimes people have other commitments and all of that, but we do have a pretty full program for you. And we'll get to some of the forms that you really need to fill out and understand how to fill out at least fairly late in the program. This is our basic agenda. We'll overview who does what in the process, roles, responsibilities, and basic principles of how the system here works. We'll do a couple of quizzes just to keep everybody kind of engaged. We'll talk about legislative changes after a little break. And then I want to focus on this next term, maximum property tax budget calculation. So that says a lot of what we're about. It talks about property tax because that's the key tax that we have knowledge of, governance over, and so forth. And we can talk, knowledgeably about. When we talk about property tax, we're also using the term maximum because we want you to understand what the state laws are regarding how to calculate what that highest number you're permitted to request from your county, for them to raise for you from the taxpayers from property tax. Having said that, just because we want you to understand what goes into the maximum does not mean we're promoting in any way. I don't want people to get the wrong idea about that. Only you can decide once you know that limit. It's like having a 50-gallon gas tank, right? You can fill it to 40, you can't fill it to 60. Okay, but within that number, you can do what you wish, you just can't go over it. So we want you to understand how that number gets derived, how that maximum is derived from your property tax calculations, and then only you decide how much you actually want the taxpayers to pay. Many districts in the course of a year don't go to their maximum, okay? And sometimes, and it's changed a little, legislation changed this to an extent, but sometimes when you don't go to your maximum increase, you're allowed to reserve the difference that nobody was asked to pay as a foregone amount. It's kind of a paper number, but it can be used in the future to fill in gaps that you might have in future budgets. And we'll spend some time talking about that, as well as the legislation, and among other things, set to fire districts. You're no longer allowed to accrue additional foregone, but we'll come back to that. After another break, we'll go through forms. Ben will spend a lot of time going through what our favorite form is, your favorite form, I hope, which is the L2 form, which is the budget certification form that you have to use to get any property tax money raised for your district. Okay, that's a have to. Okay, and you also have to use what? The 2026 form. Don't pick up an old one and turn in the 2024 form or something, or 5. Okay, so we'll spend a lot of time talking about the form, the different nuances of it, and how it works. So a little bit of overview, and the first thing we like to talk about by way of overview is just the year. Sounds kind of silly, but it's actually pretty significant. So property tax years are calendar years. Your year, for budget purposes, might be a fiscal year of some other kind, but we're always going to be talking about calendar year. So we're entering into tax year 2026, but most of us, or many of us, me, for example, have not finished paying our 25 property taxes yet. I expect to get a bill from the county very soon, and I'll pay off the second half of my 2025 taxes, which are not delinquent unless I don't pay them by the 20th of June. Okay, those taxes that I pay on the 20th of June will get distributed to you in July sometime, and that will be a conclusion of your 2025 property tax year, regardless of what fiscal year it's for. Okay, that's very important because when you fill out your forms, we're looking ahead toward that 2026, regardless of whether it's your 2027 fiscal year for us, and for property tax purposes, it's booked as 2026. It gets really confusing. I know the most confusing part that I see is when you have elections and you want a special levy of some sort, which is fine, and we'll talk about that more later, but you put the wrong year on the thing, confusing everybody. Confusion is not a good thing. So if you're wondering, what year do I put on this thing for this election, for this new levy that I want, and you're really confused by that, please talk to us before it becomes, carved in stone, and we look at it and we go, I don't know, that was for last year. What are they really doing? So we don't want that. Okay. $5 each time. That's low. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on at this point and talk a little bit about roles in the process. And we'll start with our role as an administrative agency with oversight responsibility in the area of property tax. So in that capacity, we review and approve levy rates and the property tax portion of your budget. Now, all we're looking for there, the key word in this item 1 is the word limit. Okay, you have limits that are in law, limits that are based on calculations based on law, and so forth. And what we care about is that, and what we're required to do is make sure you haven't exceeded a limit. You haven't asked for $50,000 in property tax when 40,000 was your limit or whatever, okay? Flip that around for a minute and think about what that doesn't say. We know when you've gone too high, and that's bad, and we'll call you on that. We don't know when you've gone too low or when it's a mistake, too low against yourself. So if you take and you meant to say $510,000 for my budget from property tax, and assuming that's a legal amount, and you transpose the numbers, so you put 150,000 in instead of 510, we don't know that you didn't really want 150 instead of 510. We know that 150, though, assuming your limit was 510, is not over the limit, So we may not even question it. We might, but, you know, so double check numbers like that. Because we can check for limits, we can't check for under it. The same thing goes for if you have a special levy and you pat yourself on the back because you're the voters in your community passed the special levy for you, and then you do nothing else. You don't report it on the L2 form. Guess how much you get for that special levy that you didn't report? You get zero. That's bad, right? If the voters, you went to all that work and the voters passed the thing, and I'm sure you need the money. So please, please be careful about those things. Now, also, when I say we review and approve, so we have second level authority in this, meaning that you don't turn documents in for the most part directly to us. You turn them into your county, okay, usually the county clerk's office, and they review and they calculate levy rates and so forth, and they check all of this as well. And then ultimately they submit the information to us. And we check over the roughly 1,100 taxing districts to make sure this item one is not exceeded. And when I say we, I mean that as Ben. Okay? Okay, let's be real here. We have one staffer set aside to do this checking. So it is a lot. Work with us, please. Okay, we've got about a month, roughly a month from the time the county finishes its work till the time we have to conclude that October date. I will add one thing here. In the case of an error that you wake up in November and discover, it's not necessarily, there's no way to fix it. There are ways to fix it for a while. November, things are usually fixable. December, maybe it gets a little worse. 2 years later, no. Okay, there's sort of a drop dead date in February the following year, but I want to warn you about that because don't say, okay, I can go to sleep from the time I submit my stuff in September until February, and then I'm okay. You said I was okay. Yeah, well, the county, after about mid-November, the county ends up in a position of if you've made a horrible error and you desperately need the money, they'll help you with it, but that means they have to rebill thousands or tens of thousands of people. Rebilling is not a fun thing for the counties, not an inexpensive thing for them. So mistakes that you uncover during the process before that October date, great. Phone call, we'll fix it. Great. Mistakes shortly after that, get in touch with us. Don't be silent. But we'll have to see what it is and see how it's fixable. And mistakes not discovered until February, middle of February or later or the following year are basically unfixable. Okay. So another thing, Jared mentioned that his area of our division in property tax is operating property. That's railroads and pipelines, and until this year, public utilities such as power companies like Idaho Power as well. And he's in charge of the values of those properties. The commission determines them and then apportions that value back to you. We'll talk about what's happening in the power and gas companies a little bit later, but we don't have final values to you until September. You'll get the rest of your values for the tax year from the county, and you'll get them in August, but we won't have them in quite on that same schedule. So just be aware of that. We do technical support and so forth. Number 4 is really important here, and that's mapping. One of the things Jared has to do is say, oh, that railroad line that runs through the ABC sewer district, not the DEF sewer district or whatever, okay? Well, how does he know that? Well, he knows that if you, people in the sewer district in that example, have told our mapping department, oh yeah, we changed our boundaries and here's the new boundary. The only way we know where your boundary is if you've told us. Cities, you annex property. Fire districts, you consolidate. All sorts of things happen that change boundaries of your service area. And when that happens, you are required to notify your county or counties, it could be more than one county, and to notify us. If you fail either one of those, I can only guarantee you we're gonna get things wrong. Okay, which nobody wants. So please, if you're wondering, gee, have I told the tax commission about my last two boundary changes? Don't wonder, we have folks, I think we have some contact information in here, but you can also write to me and I will send that inquiry up the line. We have records dating back, to statehood in many cases regarding your boundaries, if you existed that long, okay? We want your boundaries to be correct. We want the proper people to be billed and the proper values to be used in setting the levy rates. Bree?
How do we handle a dispute on boundaries? Because right now, for at least the library district, there's a dispute with Avamore on our county, whether or not, some of those new builds are considered our library district.
So I guess I'm confused. The Avamore is its own type of district called a community infrastructure district, which is different.
I think our boundaries are also a county boundary for our library district.
Oh, you use a county boundary?
Yes, for voting, I think is what I don't know. It's kind of really gray, and I tried to ask the county about it and they're still not sure.
Okay,
So,
well, voting is an issue I can't
okay,
comment,
well,
but
I'm saying the boundaries they were using, I guess, were similar, and it was considered, part of that was considered Boise County.
yeah. Well, Avamore is in more than one county. I don't remember exactly which ones. Is it in 3 now? Okay. But I don't know where your library district is, library district, right? Yeah. So what I would do is suggest you contact us for our current map
Okay.
of the library district. And then we'll at least give you that information, and then you can see if it matches anything you have and the county has, okay?
All right, thank you so much.
That would be the best way forward, I think, on this. Thank you for the question. It's really important to us to not ignore these and make sure the boundaries are correct in all cases. Moving on, we distribute sales tax revenue sharing, if you've been getting that, and also property tax replacement dollars. We'll talk more about those later. They have to do with agricultural equipment that became exempt about 25 years ago, and some personal property like machinery and equipment that became exempt more recently. But we'll talk more about that. We calculate what's called a gross earnings tax if you have things like solar farms, wind farms, geothermal, and electrical and natural gas co-ops. We do a calculation. The counties do billing for you on that. With the exception of solar, it's not part of your property tax budget, but we'll talk more about that too. This year, for the first time, we're estimating the amount of money you were getting from companies like Idaho Power Company and Intermountain Gas Company. They will not be subject to property tax moving forward into 2026, but there's a substitute tax. The goal was to be as neutral as possible, and we will be estimating those amounts as well as billing and distributing that revenue on the same calendar that your normal property tax billing and distribution was on. So it's intended to be as seamless as possible to you folks. We're still working on that because this is the first year of it. Urban renewal. Do any of you here today represent agencies, urban renewal agencies? Oh, yeah, which one?
The Caldwell Urban Renewal Agency.
Oh, well, of course. Okay, yeah, I was just over there recently. So that's right. Thank you. And one thing we do several things, but one thing we do with regard to urban renewal is we maintain a registry of the plans and also ask for attestation on some of the plans, whether there have been changes in the last period. So that's an important function as well. The last 3 years or so, there's been substantial tax relief provided by the legislature. Some of it is known as homeowner tax relief, HTR, and those amounts we certify to counties. Now, they do not affect your budgeting process. It's just somebody else pays the tax. It comes out before the bottom line on the tax bill. It does not change the amount you levy or the amount you're entitled to as far as your maximum is concerned, okay? So it should be seamless. It has been for the last several years. In our class today and really onward, we have some limitations. We just can't go beyond certain things. And the first one is that we look at revenue, property tax revenue for the most part is what we're talking about and what we have some governance over. We don't look at or know about how you're allowed to expend money. Can I use this money from this fund to buy X? It's not in our governance. It's not what we do. So we suggest on questions like that, you go to some of these organizations we've got listed. If you don't see your own organization listed, then if you have an independent auditor, go to them. Do we have any independent auditors here? It's only Eastern Idaho, I guess. We get several of them in our sessions, especially Idaho Falls. But at any rate, many of you have independent auditors and legal advisors, and that would be to whom we'd suggest you go for questions about expenditure issues. The last bullet here is important. You're going to sign a form, this L2 form, submitting your budget if you want some property tax. And when you sign it, you attest to having done all the precursor steps correctly to the best of your knowledge, okay? Some of you are required to have budget hearings, some of you aren't, and so on. And you're attesting to having done all of those things. And we assume that that's correct, as you've attested to, until there's a challenge. Okay, what's a challenge? The challenge is usually a phone call, not probably an email, although it could be, but a challenge is usually a phone call to me sometime in the fall where there's a contention that the district did something wrong. I had a challenge one time. Some of you will remember this story because you've been here before. It's a true story, although it dates back a ways. And it was a fire district. And the person calling in said to me, I don't think this fire district ever had its budget hearing. That would be bad because fire districts are, in fact, required to have budget hearings, okay? Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is the representative of the, in that case, fire district, you get a phone call from me. And I want to call you. I don't want to send you an email, okay? I want to call you. And I called the gentleman who was the fire chief in this case. And I said, hey, a taxpayer called me and said that they didn't think you did your budget hearing. What's up? And the answer from the fire chief was, this was not a good answer. Okay? You want a better answer than that, I hope. Okay? Sometimes there are criteria too that you have to maintain. There's special school district law and emergency funds where they have to have an increase in attendance from year to year. And so we would, a challenge would be they didn't have that. Well, they get a phone call from me saying, can you provide some records showing you did, okay? And once they do that, everything's fine. You want to be sure you've done what's necessary in order to not have these challenges be something that really jeopardizes your budget. Here are the other roles. The county assessor does valuation, but with the exception of the operating property that I mentioned that we value. They also, very importantly for most of you, develop a new construction role, which has only one purpose, and that's to track additional property that enables you as a district to have a higher limit on your budget for the year. You can get more property tax based on our laws, based on new construction. So if the county doesn't track the new construction, you would not get that additional capacity. So that's under the assessor. County clerk should be your main liaison, providing information, working with you on your forms, helping you out in many ways, ultimately providing information to county commissioners, to us, and distributing the revenue that comes in through the county treasurer's office. So they bill, they collect, and then that's turned over through the county clerk to you. County commissioners have the authority to set the rate, approve your property tax budget, but that should be very perfunctory. It shouldn't be a big deal. You've done everything right. You've submitted stuff timely and so on. You should be fine on that. That's all that requires. And ultimately, they submit that information to us according to the dates shown here. Your responsibilities. The first one is notify your county clerk or clerks if you're in more than one county. If you're in more than one county, you always have to do everything in duplicate or triplicate or whatever, okay? So that every single county you're in, gets that same notice. I think about the city of Eagle because I know it's in 3 counties right now after some annexations recently. So they have an obligation to notify equally all 3 counties. You can't say, well, my city hall is in county A, so I'll only communicate with county A. No, don't do that, okay? So the budget hearing date and the location in writing, April 30th each year. That hasn't changed in many years. There's a penalty if you don't do that. The county or you'd be frozen at your last year's property tax budget. So that's an unnecessary, unnecessary penalty we don't need to see imposed upon you. So please comply with that. That's the statutory requirement. Central registry. Now, this has to do with the controller's office. We are not the controller's office, but we do administer the penalty on this one if you're out of compliance with the financial reporting requirements that they have. And if you are, and you get back in compliance by roughly September, then you'll be okay. Otherwise, again, you get your property tax budget frozen, and we withhold some distributions from you for things like sales tax. Check with them if you have questions on that one, though. You have to do your advertising. Okay, we talked about that. If you're going to go out there and you've not used your maximum increase in previous years, so you have some foregone amount that's been accrued, been tracked on paper, and some of this goes back to 1995, okay? If that number is out there and you want to now bring it into your budget, have the taxpayers pay it, in other words, they haven't so far, then you have to do a resolution for that, have a public hearing and say specifically what it's for. If, on the other hand, you don't want to do that, but you want to accrue more foregone, and you're not a fire district because that law got changed this year, okay? Then you also need a resolution. The first resolution, the one for recovering some of it, that's due with your L2 form. So in other words, it's due in September. The second one for accruing more foregone, if you're still eligible, is not due until the end of the year. Okay. You certify your budget, you sign your form, there are the due dates. You can ask for 7 working day extensions. If you're in more than one county, you have to get permission for that from the county commissioners in each of the counties. Any questions on this? This is the law about the budget hearing notification and the penalties. Let's talk a little bit about hearing requirements, because this is a big issue that comes up. And I can't tell you exactly what your requirements are or what newspaper you publish in or how many days before your hearing, because the laws are different in the case of different districts. These are the ones we've been able to track down, so cemetery districts have a requirement only if their budget is over $3,500. Hospital districts, you have a special requirement that if your rate goes up beyond a certain point, you have to do a public hearing, otherwise you're not required to. And I want to say one more thing about that. Community colleges, for example, are not required to do public budget hearings, but most of them do. And so this doesn't mean just because you're not required, you shouldn't. That's a little bit different, right? So the NA by community college, I know that many of them, if not all of them, do hearings. Library districts are required, rec districts are required, and so forth. Okay? Certain things are kind of uniform about what has to be in the notification of hearing, the thing you publish. And one thing is the date, time, and location. This should be pretty obvious, right? You're going to have a hearing, tell people where and when it is. Sound like a good thing? And you also have to show both expenditures, what you're going to spend money on, and revenues, and specify the amount of revenue from property tax. We have a rule, basically law, that says the amount you asked for on the L2 form cannot exceed what you published. So be really careful on that. In other words, you publish a number, you say, okay, I'm publishing that I'm going to ask the taxpayers for $100,000. And then you go to your meeting, your public hearing, and your board says, you know, that wasn't enough. We want to ask for more. We see that our limit's higher than that. We think we should have asked for $120,000. So we, the board of the XYZ district, are going to approve $120,000, even though you advertised for 100. Is that okay? No, that's not okay. The amount on the L2 is not allowed to exceed the published number. You would have to have a new publication, a new hearing, and so on. Now, careful, the board could go lower. They just can't go higher. They could say, we're only going to approve 95,000. You published 100. That's legal, but not the other, okay? So we have examples. So this is one, we have the name on here, Raft River Highway District in Cassia County. And it's got notice will be at the Raft River Highway District, at the regular meeting rather of the Raft River Highway District on the 10th of August in Malta, district office on Main Street, so on. It's got all this information, including the time of the thing. It's got estimated expenditures. It's got revenue, and it breaks out that $1.5 million of revenue into property tax levies, 339, some replacement monies, and so on. It looks really good to us. Okay, they get a star or whatever. Okay. Cities apparently are required to do a publication that shows expenditures and revenue for 3 years. So the city of Bonners Ferry in North Idaho has done that. It's also got all the other requisite information about the date and time and place and so forth. It's got property tax broken out. It's got the property tax levy, 736,000 they're asking for, some replacement money. And it's got a special line here that many of you are also eligible for, whether you're a city or not, called a judgment refund. A few years ago, we had some court cases going on with the power and some of the other companies in the operating property sector. And when we lost, it meant they had been paying taxes on too high of a value. When that happens, there's got to be refunds. And with the refunds, shares of the refunds are assigned to every taxing district that was getting money from that company while the case was going on. In this case, Bonners Ferry was getting $1,700. Their share was $1,700 of the related to that difference due to the appeal. So they were allowed to keep themselves whole by levying for that. But it's really important that they identify that in the hearing, and certainly more so than in the publication, certainly in the property tax asked for on the L2 form. If you don't put it on the L2 form, you don't get it. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. I mentioned refunds and stress it because this is the second year, and there's a 2-year window during which you can levy for those refunds, and this is the second year of them. So if you have questions on amounts remaining and so forth, check with your county clerk. Now, this example isn't quite as good. This fire district, we covered up its name. Okay, its proposed budget, it says the following is the proposed budget. And it's got anticipated expenditures, 532,000. It says when its hearing is and all of that. What's wrong? What?
No revenue.
No, we don't know what their revenue, we don't know what they're asking for from property tax or anything else for that matter, but there's no revenue indicated on here. So this would not be an acceptable budget hearing publication. Here's a cemetery district, proposed expenditures. It's got expenditures. Again, no revenue. What else? What else is wrong here? Yeah, where do I go if I want to be at the hearing? I don't know. I don't know when it is. I don't know where it is. I don't know anything, right? So save yourself trouble and don't, think about what you're doing, what you're reporting, what your requirements are in law and so forth. Now, this is just sort of a public service announcement about the information or the contact information regarding the local governing entity's central registry, which is the state controller's office, okay? And I want to point out one thing on here. We've been told at meetings just through this tour that the SCO is requiring some updated information by July 1st. Is that right, Ben? Right. But we reviewed the statute, and this is taken right out of the statute, and it hasn't changed, correct? Okay. So if there's concerns over that July versus the December date, please take them up with SCO. We're not involved in that, okay? But what does happen is we're required to administer the penalties and we don't determine whether you're in or out of compliance. But SCO does, and they notify us. They give us updated lists and so forth. But at some point in time, it's too late to do anything, usually by about late September or so. And at that point, we'd have to have you freeze your property tax budget from the prior year. Withhold sales tax, we're withholding over $1 million. Is it up to $1.5 million? Is that what you told me?
1.3.
1.3 million. We're withholding that from taxing districts. It's their share. It's your money. We'd love to pay you, but we're not allowed to because you're out of compliance. Some of you, okay, okay. But if you're out of compliance with SCO's requirements, then we're required to withhold that money until they tell us, oh, this district's back in compliance, at which time we'll release, that money. Okay. So again, questions on this, you should contact them. There's the contact information. So a little bit about principles of property tax, how it works in our state. So we start out excuse me. We start out looking at your total budget, but really you start out this way. And then subtract anything you're getting from other sources of revenue. You have some fees, user charges, grants from somebody, whatever. Subtract that out, and the difference then is property tax, or the property tax portion of your budget, the amount of revenue you're anticipating from property tax. It's not affected by the homeowner tax relief that I talked about earlier. There is an effect for school districts on what's called school district facility funds, but that's not relevant here. The levy rate then is produced by taking that property tax portion of the budget, in this case $100,000, and dividing by the taxable value. You don't do that. You can't do that. You won't even have, for most cases, the correct taxable value or the finalized taxable value in time to do this because of that operating property component. But the tax, 100,000 that you want divided by 100 million in that taxable value gives us a rate. When that point, and that's just math. You can't lock in the rate. You have to work off the budget, the numerator, the 100,000 is the number you're in control of, okay? And whatever that number is, then the county is just going to do the math, dividing it by your net taxable value and coming up with a rate. And that rate is charged back to a home or a piece of farmland or whatever. The sum of all of those payments will equal the $100,000, okay? That's the way the system works. Don't try to second guess it. Lock in your rates. It just doesn't work. The values change annually in our state and in your district. What's been happening in recent years, going back really now quite a few years from the time we came out of the big recession in 2008, 9, 10, we've seen values go up. And in some years, like 2022 was an astonishing year, and I do say that. Truly, I've never seen a year like it when statewide values went up well over 40% and over 50% in the residential type property and from one year to the next. And it wasn't catch up, it was market. The market demand was huge that year. This is something I go around the country sometimes and talk about that year, and everybody, no matter what state they're in, pretty well nods and says, yeah, that happened here too. Okay, so it's a big, amazing event in 2022 or so. At any rate, this is what happens when values go up, rates go down. Doesn't affect your budget directly. Here I've locked the budget in for this taxing district at 55,000 every year. And I've shown a case where the taxable value went up quite a bit. Not that dissimilar from what's happened, from 137 to 175 million. You can see the levy rate going down. Some folks don't believe this is real, this type of thing. This is hypothetical, true, but we can show you very, very similar real events just like this all over our state, not just like in Ada County or something, but all over the state where we've seen drops of this magnitude as typical, not unusual at all. And that's what's been happening. You can't just say, oh, I like having that rate of 0.0004. I'll just apply that to my full taxable value and generate a lot more money. That's great, but you'd be exceeding the budget cap, which we'll talk more about. That basically says, no, you can't do that. So the converse of that is true. Rates have been falling, and they've been falling all over the state. They're at all-time lows right now. Now, sometimes, occasionally, and very rarely anymore, but occasionally we do get into rate limit trouble. And this is just an example if that ever happened. And again, it's very rare anymore. But you all have, with the exception of maybe sewer and water districts, all the rest of you have two types of limits to pay attention to. A dollar limit from how much your budget can grow from year to year, okay? And a rate limit that's hard-coded into law. And I said, you're not really in control of that, which is true, but you still can't exceed it, okay? So when they're both there, we have to pay attention to both rates. So in this hypothetical example, we say this taxing district's maximum budget from property tax is 55,000. Just assume that that's been calculated correctly. It's also got 125 million in value in that district. When I divide those two numbers, I get the answer 0.00044. Well, so what? Oh, but wait. We've got a law out there for this district. This could be a cemetery district, for example, that says the law, the statutory maintenance and operation levy limit is 3 zeros and a 4. So is that 3 zeros and 2 4s going to be okay? No, it's a little bit too high. How much too high? Well, it would take a $5,000 rollback to get it back under or to the limit. Okay, so it has one choice of saying, well, I guess I can't have the 55,000 and go back to the limit, or, and the or is important here because all of you have this separate authority in case this ever does happen to you. Maybe that district is spending $5,000 a year on liability insurance premiums. What's paid for out of a fund that all of you can have if you want to, called a tort fund. Tort fund is for one purpose, liability insurance premiums. Okay. If they set up that fund in addition to their M&O fund, they could levy the 50,000 in M&O and the other 5,000, assuming it's real. It's not a made-up number, you know. Assuming it's really what their liability insurance premiums are, then they could levy that in that other fund. And you might ask, well, what's the limit on that fund? Oh, there's no rate limit. It just has to be rolled into the total budget limit. So it is available. Many of you use it now. You don't have to if you're not close to the, you know, the rate limit in law, but it is available to them. Okay. Another thing that's available to some districts, particularly cities and counties, is the ability to add additional funds. Almost every district has some sort of general, or a lot of times it's called M&O, Maintenance and Operations Fund. But there are other funds out there too. Now here we have a county, and the county has a general fund, M&O, it has a port fund and a parks fund, Parks and Rec. Okay. And we see that that county has a maximum property tax budget of $200,000. And it's using all of it. Oh, but wait, now the county says, hey, you know what? We want to support our museum over here. And we just read the law, and the law says there's actual statutory authority, this is true, for a levy, a property tax levy for a museum fund. Great. So we'll levy for the museum fund, and it can go up to 0.0003. What's wrong with this reasoning? Did I create more budget authority? No, the budget authority was all used up. See, it says their maximum property tax was 200,000. By creating the new fund, you don't get more authority. That way, you only get out from under some rate cap. Okay, so it would not help them in this case unless they simultaneously could cut the budget of one of the other funds that they have, because they can't go over the 200,000. Yes, we would tell them you can have a museum fund. Yes, you can have a levy for the museum fund, but no, you can't in a total get more than the 200,000. Okay, how you split it up is your business. This is more pertinent to cities and counties, but some of the rest of you too. Hospitals have a few funds like a special reserve fund, for example, they can use. But again, it doesn't give more budget authority. So what are the limits? We've alluded to them a few times already. What are the limits regarding your property tax portion of your budget? And we started out by saying, well, those limits relate to how much you can increase from year to year, but we're not going to just go back to the immediate last year. We're going to go back to the highest number that you have of the last 3 years. And we're also going to insert another term here, a lot of terms. And the term is non-exempt. Okay, sometimes the voters go out and approve something, or we have those judgments that I mentioned earlier that you're doing special refund levies for and so on. Those are considered exempt from this 3% cap. So we have we'll go through a laundry list of what's exempt in a few minutes. So we look at your general fund is not exempt, okay? So we look at your general levy and we say, well, what's the highest for the last 3 years? And that number can be increased by 3%. We include some of the replacement monies that's in lieu of property tax. In addition to the 3% increase, you're allowed an increase from new construction and from annexation. Annexation being you changed your boundaries last year, you have more property to serve, and so forth. The maximum sum of those three components, 3% new construction, annexation, cannot represent an increase of more than 8%. That's the limit, okay? Now there are exceptions for that part. We'll talk about new law, because fire districts now have a 15% increase limit and so on. Okay? This is the basic rule, and then we'll do legislation in a few minutes. When you overlay urban renewal areas, which many of you in this region do, then when those urban renewal areas expire, which they do in time, didn't one close out a year or so ago in Caldwell? Seems like 2 of them closed out, 3 of them closed out. Okay. So it does happen, and at that time you get a bump. The taxing districts that boundaries included the urban renewal area, you get a bump upward in your budget that's exempt or it can exceed the 8% cap. When we get all done with that, we subtract replacement monies, add in any foregone you're recovering with a resolution. So that's the basic system. We'll delve into this in more detail during Ben's section in a few minutes. Now, I've been talking about exempt funds and non-exempt funds. These are the exempt funds, meaning that with special approval provided, as indicated here, they're not subject to this 3% cap. So maybe the pump on your irrigation system broke down and you need $50,000 you hadn't planned for a new pump. That's sort of like a one-time expenditure kind of thing, right? And you could go out to the voters, of course, it takes time to do all this, but you could go out to the voters and ask for a temporary 2-year override overriding the budget limits, overriding the 3%, the 8%, what have you. Any district can do this. It requires a simple majority to pass. But probably the biggest drawback is you have to do it at either a May, and it's too late for May, or November election. There is no real third opportunity for this, okay? So if you didn't pass one a week ago, that, if you did, that one could be on your levies this year and you'd start getting money in January of next year. However, if you go out to the voters in November, and I'm not trying to discourage you, but if you go out to the voters in November of this year, then even if they approve that levy, it's too late to recertify. It's past the September dates. That means you can certify first for that additional money in September of 2027, and you'll get money in January 2028. Okay? So be aware of all of that. Don't say, wow, I just passed this in November. Let's call up the county right away and get them to redo the levy. That's not an error of the kind they can fix, okay? That's a different sort of situation, all right? Permanent overrides, this would be this would be maybe the fire district wants to say, hey, you know what, we're serving a growing community. We haven't been able to keep up. We need to hire 3 new firemen. And that's a permanent thing. I don't want to hire them and fire them a week later or a year later, right? And so in that sort of situation, you want a permanent override. You want to bump your base budget upward to some higher number moving forward. And when you do that's permanent override, you need a 2/3 majority for that same election timing criteria. And cities with low rates can do it with a 60% voter approval. Otherwise, it's 2/3. Okay. Any questions on these first two? Okay. Bond issues. These are long lasting, usually 20 years or so. And all districts have authority to go out to the voters and ask them for a bond. It goes on for a long period of time. It can be leveraged. It's kind of like a mortgage. They all require 2/3 majorities voter approval to be passed. Okay. Sometimes there are additional limits and so forth placed on them. You need to read your statutes. Planned facility levies. These are more unusual than bonds. They're shorter term, generally 10 years. Library districts and community colleges have these, school districts as well. They can be passed sometimes with as low as a 55% majority, and sometimes they take 2/3. It depends on several factors, and we're glad to work with you and help you through that process of understanding those factors if you are running one of these. And then finally, the judgment levies. All districts can do these, but remember, for the judgments that I talked about earlier, dealing with the Idaho Power Court case and some of those others, this is the last year. So if you levied it last year, maybe you're done. If you split into 2 halves, or you didn't know it in time last year and you didn't levy it, you can do it this year. And you should check with your county. I don't know, do we maintain any numbers? We don't on our website on the dollar amounts remaining. No, so they should check with their county on that, okay? All right. When you levy for that, and Ben will show you this more later, but you need to identify it as a 63-1305 levy. Otherwise, we don't know what it is. This is not a judgment like somebody fell and got hurt walking into your building and they sued you and you paid them $10,000. This is not that kind of judgment, okay? This is a judgment against us on a valuation case, or it could be against your county on a valuation case as well. So this is what we call the voter approved fund tracker. This is for you to report your voter approved funds when you have those elections, and to report the dates, the amounts, and so forth. All this information has to be filled out. Then we'll go through the form a little bit more with you, but I want to point out one facet, the thing that's labeled new on here. It says, did the district levy for a bond? So you had a bond levy in 2025, and that bond is now paid off. It's expired. We don't know when that's happened. Just seeing a zero in your bond levy doesn't mean necessarily that it's paid off, usually, but not always. So we need you to enter a yes or a no there. And why are we asking you for that extra step? Well, that's to help Jared out, right? Because Jared has an obligation as he computes those taxes on the new kilowatt hour tax and therm tax to make an adjustment in the amounts and the percentages based on bonds that have expired. That's part of the law. So we have to know that going forward. And so please help us, help yourself out and everybody else by telling us if one of those bonds has expired. Ben, anything else I should say on that at this point? So let's talk a little bit about replacements. Replacements are usually well, they're added back in when they're replacements as listed here in determining the highest amount of the last 3 years. And we'll show you that works to your advantage, actually. The growth from the replacement issue, though, does not include money you're getting from solar farms. So we don't add that one back in, we add the others back in. So what are most of the replacements that you're getting? Replacement, what does that word mean? It means at one time, your district probably taxed farm equipment. And in 2001, the legislature said, you know what, there ought not be property tax on farm equipment anymore. So the state cut checks. And if you were taxing farm equipment in the year 2000, then you're still getting a check that's called replacement money related to the tax you charged on farm equipment in 2000 plus a 6% bump, stuff like that. The amounts are really unchanged for all of you since 2001. School districts were changed once in 2006. If you say, I don't know what we're talking about here, because my district just simply, my fire district, which some of them do, doesn't levy on, never levied on equipment anyway, then this is not relevant to you. But hospital districts, cemetery districts, cities, counties, and the like levied on this type of property. Cities are probably not a big deal since it's farm equipment. The second one is even broader, personal property. In general, personal property is things like machinery and equipment, okay? Those desks that you see, the chairs that we have, the tables and podium and so forth, computers, and all of that would be considered personal property. If it's in your home, it's not taxable. If it's in a business, it is. Oh, but wait, in 2013, the legislature said, the first $100,000 of that won't be taxable anymore. And then in 2020, they said, another 150 won't be taxable anymore. And so they replaced that money. So the taxes in our state otherwise would shift to other taxpayers. So they replaced that money with these personal property replacement dollars. Now, both the ag replacement and the personal property replacement dollars, Ben, help me out, are on our website. And by district, right? So every district could go out there, take a look, and see what the amount is for your district, and it will be ultimately reported on some forms and reported on the L2. Okay. In addition, so those are constants. You either get them or you don't. If you say to me, I don't know, I'm a brand new district. I got formed in 2023. I'm a new rec district. Yeah, well, 2021 was a key year, 2013 was a key year, and 2000 was a key year. If you didn't exist in those years, then you're not getting that money, okay? You're not eligible. Recovered, recaptured amounts, though, are an ongoing thing that occurs sort of randomly, but in some counties and not all. So if I claim 2 homeowners exemptions, for example, I'm only allowed 1, and the county caught me on that, then they would say, oh, you owe us a lot of money back, but you shouldn't have been getting 2 for the last 5 years or something, right? And when they do that, they recover that money from me and some interest and so on, and they turn it over to you because some of it was based on your levy, right, against that, misrepresented exemption or whatever you want to call it. So if you get some of that recovered homeowners exemption, that amount will be, it'll be subtracted. You won't need to raise that from property tax, and then we'll add it back in the future so you don't get penalized for future growth opportunities. Recaptured QIE is much rarer. We used to have some associated with Micron here. I don't know if there's any going on currently. It's QIE stood for Qualified Investment Exemption, and it's been very rare that we've had any recapture from that. So you could check with your county on that to know if there's any of that money. They'll be tracking it. This year, we have a brand new replacement, as I mentioned a couple of times, a new type of kilowatt hour tax substituting for the property tax that companies like Idaho Power were paying, and a new therm tax substituting for property tax that companies like Intermountain Gas Company were paying. The other operating property companies are the same as they have been. Fire districts. On this new kilowatt hour and therm tax, the real question mark for you is whether you are getting tax from these type of companies, from Idaho Power, from Intermountain Gas in the first place. I will say that most fire districts do not in our state, but some do. Okay, to get tax in the past, to get tax and to be eligible, I'm talking only of fire districts now, to be eligible for this new kilowatt hour tax, then you would have had to have an agreement between you and the company, okay, saying, yes, Idaho Power agrees that you will provide fire protection for these substations or whatever, and therefore they will pay, tax to you and so forth. If you're wondering about this and going, I don't know if we have an agreement like that or not, we do know, okay? At least we think we know. So you can contact our office and we'll look up and tell you what we have in the way of an agreement for you. This is not pertinent to, I guess I'm trying to remember, do ambulance districts fall into this? No, I don't think they did.
They decide their categories when they create the district.
So it's not the same thing, okay. So this is really pertinent only to fire districts. So if you're a fire district and you're wondering, gee, am I gonna get any of this new kilowatt hour tax? Then we can help you answer that in terms of whether you have an agreement with one of the germane companies, okay? So check with us. Solar farms. There are solar farms in this region. We have them in Ada and Elmore, not sure the other counties. If you get tax on this, it's not a property tax, it's a special tax with a rate that's fixed in law, and it reduces your property tax levy because you're getting the money from an alternate source, from the solar farm tax, okay? We don't add it back in when we do your highest of the last 3 years, and so forth. And we book it based on the year shown here. So we do a 12-month year ending in this case, not as the calendar year, but in this case as that June 30th of 2026. So the county will receive the revenue and from the solar farm. I assume you tell the county how much to bill. Is that right, Jared, on the solar farms?
Correct.
Okay. And that was done like recently, sometime in May.
Notified on the third Monday in May.
Okay, and then after that, the county bills and the money that comes in the door in that time frame, in that window for this year, you'll be notified of that, and then that'll be subtracted because you got it from a different source. Okay, that's the way that works, basically. Okay. And I'll let Ben take over quizzes.
So we have a quiz here. If you were here last year, you got to try this for the first time. But if not, if you have a phone that can use a QR code scanner, you could just hold it up to your packet and participate that way. Or if you don't like those or don't know how to use the QR codes, feel free to use the link that I gave you, a short link on your packet there or on the screen up here. And we will talk about this short quiz. It's just 2 or 3 questions in just a couple minutes. All right, let's look at the quiz answers here. It says I've got 24 responses. First one said, true or false, the published budget needs to indicate the portion of the budget that will be funded from property taxes. That one is true, so most of us got that one correct. That is related to that rule that says that the amount that you publish in property tax can't be exceeded when you go to the counties to submit your L2. So by publishing your property tax, you're basically setting a ceiling for yourself when you actually go to do the L2. Okay. In order to do that, you do need to say how much that property tax is. Next one said, does the 8% cap, which is actually 15% for fire and ambulance districts, on annual budget increases include the 3% base budget increase? 88% of us got this one correct. That is yes. The percent caps that are in play only apply to the 3% plus new construction annexations. So anything else would be beyond that 8% cap. Last one said, if the deadline to submit the L2 form to our county has passed, but our district forgot to publish our budget this year and we have a requirement to, I think the rest of the question says, are we allowed to levy property tax this year? So I phrase this question very intentionally. If the deadline has passed, you have a requirement to publish your budget and you did not meet that requirement, you do not get property tax. That's the correct answer to this one. And that is because there are a lot of folks who tend to think, well, can I just have what I had last year? No, that is a very common misconception. If you have the requirement to publish your budget, you have the requirement to tell your taxpayers how much you want to charge in property tax, and you don't do that. Maybe I'm a taxpayer in your district. I assume I'm not paying you anything. Okay, that's how the law works. You would be held to zero property tax revenue, and that has happened and has hurt some districts. So we're trying to make sure everybody understands that. Okay, you don't just get what you got last year in this situation. Okay, any questions about the 3-question quiz here? We feel okay? We have a 10-minute break now. So we'll come back at about 2:25.
Contact if I need to talk to somebody about solar. We have to now and then we're annexing properties. But part of the company. We have an agreement. Or to deal with the same like formula that we do. The like.
To the solar, so. I don't think we have any.
Because do you have any other farm on the state land?
I don't think we have any solar farms on many. They're a little bit different too. We usually.
Right.
So then you disagree.
So that's like, so we had kind of like, they're annexing in. That's where the next get that gross earnings, you can go the land is providing.
Some of the.
So I don't know what the.
No, Steve does.
Steve.
He was basically in between offices, so he can still do like. Assessor or something like that.
And it was like the assessor.
But in the beginning, he's sure, but if it was. He would also fix that.
It was an issue.
Okay, so the, because we would only actually if we're not getting the.
So basically.
We're getting. So we didn't, we would get the people to go and annex.
No, it's not.
But they're not in any. We can talk about
That was a.
the treasurer's like. The treasurer's office.
City. Which was not.
Yeah, he's a nice guy. I don't know. No, it had this one, so it was like, still, I think they. That county is very short. We have an agreement. We're seeing the they don't want it. Either all.
And then it followed up with master.
If you say anything wrong. And if you.
How much? No, you can't.
It's an intersection of both. You're taking out finance, plus the values from the county. To create
Get to the head.
Sure, that doesn't ask to this like. That answer there.
Yeah. Yeah, they're, well. They have like a whole building. They just-
So I don't know what the issue is today.
But it might be coming out near there. But they. Yeah, I think we have an agreement. Yeah, like, because they don't take, they don't look at it. Like, we have an agreement for that. Sorry. But do they give an exemption?
I don't know.
They assume that it's not the tax number. I think I have.
I feel like the county,
And then, so like your easements, but they're almost about 1,500 to about 500. But the state land. And so. Like, not like we have the prison property right now. So.
it's really interesting.
Yeah.
People use like.
So
there's still some.
Yeah.
So they're just like.
6 months. So like so everything else we get it. And just like they don't normally print me. Yeah.
That's why we could just don't try to tell anyone what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm sure we know, but I'm right.
Yeah, right.
It might just.
Most of us.
So if you did include, yes.
Well, they come in.
Yeah, of course.
We only want 20 feet because we're not. It's like no fire.
No fire district.
Okay, let's see if we can kind of work our way back in, please. And we'll get going with the next portion here. This is the exciting portion, legislation. And legislative changes this last year were rather significant. I really do appreciate seeing so many fire districts here in our audience, but a little bit of a history lesson first. So let's go back to the last few years. We had a system that was relatively unchanged for a very long period of time, but the whole current, like 3% plus new construction, that whole system dates from 95, okay? And there were a few changes, but it was really relatively stable until until 2021. Up until that time, we took new construction and annexation, and if you had those, just used your last year's rate, non-exempt rate, and if that got you 30% more tax, because you built a bunch of new subdivisions and stuff, or somebody has in your district, then so be it, you got 30% more tax. But that system changed in 2021 dramatically. Now, to some extent, it's been reverted now, but we'll talk about that in a minute, and only for selected districts. So House Bill 389 came on, and it said, we know that levy rates are doing what? Oh, they're going down as values rise, okay? And so we ought to estimate current year rate, which is probably lower than last year's rate. Most of the case, that's true. And so they created this different estimation system for the rate as opposed to using just the last year's rate. So it got a little more complicated there. And then they said, hey, that new construction and annexation, and this is confusing to a lot of people, but the taxing districts ought not to get a full-blown 100% credit for that. You ought only get 90%. Don't ask me where that number came from, but that's in the statute. And what gets confusing to people is they say, oh, so if I build a $100,000 piece of property like an improvement, you're only going to tax me at 90,000? No. You're only going to get credit in your budget increase allowance as if it were 90,000. Two different things. The taxes will be based on the value, not 90% of the value or some other percent. How much you get to bump your budget up is based on the 90%. Okay. And then they said, and furthermore, no matter what you've done as far as annexations and new construction, you ought to be limited to an 8% increase. And then they wrote an exception for urban renewal and Fort one. That persisted from 2021. Really, this shows 2023 with some tax relief being thrown in by the legislature, some significant tax relief for both schools and homeowners. And then in 2025, there was some corrective legislation. So the first thing that happened, and a lot of this is going to affect fire districts. So the first thing that happened was normally, if you were not a fire district, like if two library districts got together and combined and became one library district. Library District A plus neighboring Library District B became, new Library District C, okay? And Library District A had $1 million budget, Library District B had $500,000. Well, $1 million plus $500,000 is 1.5. Just add them together and go on about your business. But fire district consolidations prior to this law change in 25 were different. They said, treat that consolidation as an annexation. I won't go into all the detail, but at one time that worked to the advantage budget-wise of the fire district. That was pre-389 with its overall cap. Now, if I had two fire districts and they each had $1 million budget, and they said, let's consolidate, it makes a lot of sense to do that. You'd go, well, time out, you're only going to get $1 million plus 8%. Which is $80,000, and you probably want 2 million if you're consolidating two $1 million budgets, right? So that wasn't working. Well, they changed that law to correct that problem in 2025, and they said fire district consolidations will not be treated that way and will not be subject to the 8% cap. They'll be just added together. I do want to note the note down here. This goes to everybody, not just fire districts. When you annex, you change your boundaries like today. Well, that's great. I don't know when you're required to provide services to that area. Let's say it's a new area. But I do know one thing, you're not going to get tax money in tax year 26 from that new area. That will be in tax year 27, going into the beginning of 28 when they'll really start. Okay, always be aware of that as you're going ahead with consolidations. We've got fire districts annexing whole cities, like what happened in Nampa a couple of years ago and so on. Always be very aware of that process that a change made after the 1st of January in a year doesn't change what we do on your taxes and all of that until the following year, full year, almost 2 years out in that case, if it were January. Okay. Now, last year, they also made some changes for fire and ambulance districts, okay, with respect to urban renewal. Now, first of all, urban renewal, fire districts that overlapped urban renewal areas were getting their budgets. Don't assume not. But because of the way urban renewal works, they were not getting new construction within that area, within that urban renewal area, because to do so would have shifted taxes to other people in the form of higher rates, and they decided not to allow that, okay? So this way they said, well, first of all, you can opt out. And if you opted out, you also got credit for the equivalent of new construction, or 80% of it, of what we call the increment. That's the added value, added property, and appreciation within the urban renewal area. But they also said the ability to opt out, I know many of you got mad at me for this last year, I know that, but they said the ability to opt out is not decided solely by the fire district, and it's not decided by the tax commission. Who is it decided by? The Urban Renewal Agency, and it's contingent on whether they need the money from your, fire districts here, from your levy to pay off their debt and their contractual obligations, okay? And that's still true. There were some possible law changes that didn't pass this year that would have affected that, but they didn't pass. So they put this into place last year, and they said, yeah, you can pull out with permission from urban renewal. Okay, and then they said that only goes, however, for old urban renewal areas, the pre-existing ones. We have new ones, and what's new? Well, new is one formed July 1 of 2025, or more recently. Did one of the Caldwell ones get formed in the new bucket, Billy?
And then one more time.
Did you form a new RAA after July 1?
Yes, we actually did, yes.
Okay, and so that new one would be automatically excluded if it was in a fire district. You know, it would be automatically excluded unless the fire district went to them and said, ooh, we want to opt in, okay? Okay, so otherwise they'd be excluded. And then you would, the district would collect money as if the REA didn't exist. Okay. So this is just the timing thing about whether it's before or after that particular critical date. But we also know moving forward, now some of you applied to get opted out of the old ones last year and got turned down. I know that, okay? And that does not mean you can't apply this year. That's up to you. I can't say what will happen, but you can apply. Now, the key drop-dead dates on this are, we have to know the status of your district. We, meaning the county, us, everybody has to know the status of your district with regard to urban renewal no later than the 4th Monday in July. So if you apply or have applied to your urban renewal agency and they're silent and don't issue you a resolution till after that date, then the opt-out won't be considered in effect till next year, till 27. If they give you the resolution and send it to us, we're in the game too. They have to send us the resolution. They do, not you, okay? We need a resolution from them on the old ones. As long as they do all that by the 4th Monday in July, then the opt-out will be accepted. Now, if you opted out last year, you don't have to do that again. Okay, you're out. That's considered permanent, yes.
So if you tried to opt out last year and it was denied, do you have to reapply and try every year?
Well, until you get out, yeah. Well, you don't have to, okay? Okay, but if you want to, right, if you want to, then you would have to reapply. If they turned you down again, it just resets the clock. It doesn't mean you're precluded, okay? So I just want people to understand that because it's confusing, isn't it? Yeah, okay. All right. Now, 2026, let's move into the year we're in. We had a cleanup law, 551, because what the old law said in 25 was that even though you opted out successfully, you weren't gonna get, and you got the increment value, you weren't gonna on an ongoing basis get new construction within that same zone, that same area. And that didn't make any sense to anybody. I think it was just a missed thing in the law. I mentioned this at a budget and levy workshop in Eastern Idaho, and the legislator who was at the workshop understood and had carried this legislation to correct that. So if you opt out, you will get credit for any increment, any growth in that area immediately, 80% of it, and you will also get credit for the usual 90% new construction within that area ongoing, okay? I'm not saying good or bad, that's entirely between you and the, the Urban Renewal Agency. Okay, another legislative change this year created this kilowatt hour and therms tax. House Bill 329 was the previous version. Last year, it got changed a little bit this year. So we're going back in time and then bringing it up to the present. Prior to this time, prior to 26 actually, rate-regulated electric and gas companies paid property tax like normal. They usually did not to fire districts unless you had an agreement, as some of you have mentioned to me, okay? But moving into the future, actually the future is now, isn't it? Beginning 2026, they will pay a special tax that is not related to their property value. It's related to kilowatt hours. What is it, Jared, sold in Idaho in the previous year?
Retail sales in Idaho in the previous year.
Okay, retail sales in Idaho. And that would go for the therms for gas companies or the kilowatt hours for electric companies. We'll be getting reports from them and so forth. So we're going to look at what they paid you based on your levies, and if you had an agreement in place, your fire district for 2025. Now, if you're wondering about these agreements, if you're a hospital district, you don't need an agreement. You're automatically included in the group, okay? If you're a city, if you're a county, if you're a library district, you're going to be getting money from these because you didn't have an option. Fire districts are the ones that had the option, okay? So we're calculating proportions of the taxes based on, from these companies, based on the property tax for the year 2025. Those proportions will be pretty much fixed, although when a district dissolves, or there's an expiring bond, we'll make some changes. We'll also adjust for consolidations and things like that. You will get notified of that. I think we have some slides on the timing of this, so let me come back to that. Now, they changed this a little bit to clarify some things with House Bill 722 this year. This law is in effect now, because it was retroactive to January 1st of this year. And it does these things. It says, any money you get from this new kilowatt hour tax, you got it from them instead of property tax. So you subtract it, you don't levy it, it would be double dipping, okay? But we add it back in for future calculations. So you don't get penalized on what constitutes 3% of what, for new construction and so forth. We will be giving estimates of the amounts to county clerks first Monday of July. And help me out here, Jared. Those estimates are based on a report for all of last year, I think, in this case, of the kilowatt hours. And that you got in April or something, right? Okay. Okay. And so we got this report showing those sales, those retail sales of kilowatt hours. Will develop percentages, and those percentages will be applied to your 2025 property tax amounts. We'll give those estimates to the counties in early July. They will have them, they will give them to you by the first Monday of August, which is when they notify you guys of all your value and other information as well. So this is what it looks like on the L2. And I'm just going to jump down, and I think you'll cover more of the recaptured part later, right? Recovered part, but I'm going to jump down to that box that's kind of highlighted on here where it says rate regulated electric and gas utility taxes, okay? Enter the estimated revenues to be received by this district for tax year 26. Okay, that is the number that you will get from the county in August. You should not be filling out your L2 yet. By then it's due in mid-September, basically, or early September. And so that number needs to go in there. What if you're a fire district and you have no agreement? And so you have no expectation of any money. Put a 0 in. Don't leave it blank, right? Put a 0 in the box, or we'll think you just skipped it. We won't know. Please enter something in that spot. And it says it on the next slide. Don't skip it. Okay. Great. Okay. All right. So do you want to cover this?
So I wanted to show you a little bit on the budget page of the L2, how this would look. So if you are filling out your budget here, you have the column 5 that I have circled in the red box. And I haven't put any property tax replacements in that column. And since I haven't done that, and the form at the bottom of that column is saying, I think you should be putting $585,000. That got carried over from a prior page on here. But since I haven't done that, the furthest right column in property tax request is over the maximum. And so I need to go and actually enter my property tax replacements, which includes this new kilowatt hour and therm tax. So once I go up above and apply that to my maintenance and operations levy to reduce that down to the 37 million, I'm now within that maximum that it's calculating for me. And I also balance to the replacements that it is expecting me to show. So all that red highlighting has gone away. Please don't send this L2 form to your county with some of that red highlighting still in there, because that's breaking a rule. And we need to understand why it's doing that and what might be happening there. On occasion, I've programmed a rule that isn't working correctly, but more often than not, it's because we need to understand how to fill out the form right. Okay, do we have any questions about how the kilowatt hour therm tax is going to look in the L2 form? It is a very similar structure to the other property tax replacements, so hopefully that feels familiar for those of you who have been doing this.
Now, you won't actually see that tax per se until January. Okay, but that's the same timetable we're on for your property tax. So, you know, you should see it then. It'll be paid in half strictly, however, as opposed sometimes people pay their full property tax, you know, in one lump sum in December, and they can't really do that because of the way this program is set up. So don't expect more during that first payment. So a little bit more legislation, then we'll wrap this section up. Fire and ambulance districts. Okay, the 8% cap, remember that was 3% plus new construction plus annexation, could not exceed 8% increase. That became a 15% effective immediately for fire and the ambulance districts. And you lucky dogs, you got to use last year's levy rate, which was much easier, right, Catherine? Much easier to do than using the preliminary levy. Of course, Ben had designed 2 separate versions of the calculations, right? To deal with that, so it wasn't easy on him, but at any rate, it does go back to that prior year's levy rate for your annexations and for your new construction. Now I'm talking about only the districts listed here, fire and ambulance. So nobody else got that particular thing, okay? But there's downside. The downside is if you don't use your full increase, you can't reserve more for the future. So you don't, now that's confusing too. Maybe you have $50,000 of foregone on the books already. Many of you do. There's like 150 million of it statewide on the books. Nobody's paid it. It's what I call an imaginary savings account, but it's on paper and it's potentially available. It's still there, fire districts. It did not go away. It doesn't expire. Okay. The only thing you can't do is if it's 50,000 today, it can't grow. It can't grow. For the rest of you, if you don't use your full increase, you can grow that foregone amount. Okay, that's the difference. Okay. And then finally, for fire and ambulance, it created an initiative and election process to roll back your property tax budget. That was a new one. We haven't seen anything like that in our state. The earliest time that election could be run because of language in the law would be November of 27. So we're kind of wait and see on that one. I would ask fire districts if you hear that the electorate in your community is considering anything like this, I guess just loop us in so we know what's going on, please. That's all I can really ask. So I think the earliest you would know, a petition would have to be, I think, organized by April of next year to proceed on this. That's really all I know about it. Okay. This is really brand new stuff. Now we're going to flip slightly. You see fire again, but now you don't see ambulance, you see library. So we've had some cases where fire, and library districts have done what I call traded property. That means the boundaries of one get expanded and the boundaries of another one of the like districts get contracted. We had 2 library districts in Bonner County do this a couple of years ago. One of them took some property and the other one lost property. Fire districts have done this as well. When this happens, you know, there were some problems. And so we have 2 different % increases affecting the amount of growth you can have in your budget from annexation. Fire, 15%, library, 8%. They didn't change that one. But they said that the % cap, that 15 or that 8, it doesn't apply to an annexation into the same type of district. So Fire District 1 takes half the property away from Fire District 2, okay? And that gets it a 30% increase in its budget capacity that year. Fine, no problem, okay? Because it was in another fire district. Oh, but wait, the other fire district lost that property. It's no longer providing service for it. It has to do a negative adjustment to its budget capacity, and we're working with the counties on that. It'll be through a negative new construction value. So it does have a negative effect on the losing district. One more point here. Fire districts can exceed this cap if they annex an entire city. You know, we had this happen in Nampa a couple of years ago. Nampa Rural Fire annexed the city of Nampa. We had other cities around the state do this. And I've had inquiries almost every year from different fire districts and cities about, hey, it would be much more efficient for the fire district to run the city fire service than the city to do it. How do we do that? You know, and so forth. And so now you would exceed that cap, and the city is required to do a subtraction, but not exactly the same way because it doesn't levy the same as a fire district. Okay, so these are pretty significant changes, really. So in this case, this form is from how you compute the annexation budget capacity, and it shows a spot on here where you would enter that. And it says enter the value of annexations into other fire districts and the value of annexations into cities. And that's considered uncapped annexation value. Help me out there. The 90% rule doesn't apply to that? Oh, it'll calculate.
The form will take into consideration the 90% factor there, but it's similar to how taxing districts have done annexations previously, where the form takes care of that for you. But the main thing I wanted to show on this slide is that this law has essentially created 2 categories of annexations for fire and library districts. Everyone else who's not a fire and library district, you still just have regular annexations that are working the same way as they did prior. But fire and library districts now have 1 bucket of annexations like they used to work, which is reduced to 90% and are still within the 8% cap. Actually, now that for fire districts, it's a 15% cap, and for library districts, it's an 8% cap, because this is going to be really easy to keep straight, right? And then you have the other bucket of the new thing, and that's these special uncapped annexations that are allowed to exceed that % cap. That would be a fire district taking property from another fire district, or a fire district annexing a city. We had a question in the back. Yeah.
How do you figure out those values? So like,
It's not up to you.
Is that the county figures that, or you guys do that?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we figure out those values? And the answer is that it's the county assessor's job to report those values to you. Yes, and so we understand that that is a new thing. We don't think it's very common in this first year. So the counties do have some time to figure out how they're going to do that. There might be some instances next year where they have to report that. Most cases, as we understand for this year, are all going to be the normal traditional annexations that are still within the percent caps. Okay, thank you for that question. It's a good question.
So when the fire district is planning to do any of these things, they need to, before everything is finalized, okay, need to get with their county officials and try to work this out. In many cases, the county will have to say, well, what are the exact parcels, you know, that are going to be within this area being annexed, so that they can really delve down into that and help you. Normally, I'd say there's operating property issues too, but most of the agreements are not going to be changed by this sort of thing.
Okay, so I think that's about all we wanted to say on this legislation. Does anyone else have any questions about this? How it would go into the L2? Hopefully this doesn't affect anyone this year, but we want to understand that for these two types of districts, we do have two boxes on the L2 form. And so when you open up the form and you're going through it, you see these questions, that you're not feeling blindsided. You should have seen them before and have an idea of what they're referring to, okay? Let's move into talking about how we calculate the maximum non-exempt property tax budget. Alan did refer to this a little bit earlier. He gave you kind of a condensed version, and I will start with that condensed version as well. I think your packets have a more complicated version I used to use, which is just kind of a wall of text. But I wanted to simplify that a little bit by showing this table up here, where we can simplify this by just holding up our hand and covering the right side of that table. Okay, that would allow us to kind of focus on a more simple explanation of what this process looks like. We take the prior budget, increase it by 3%. We get a budget increase for our new construction in our district, for any annexations that we've done. If there's an urban renewal that's expiring, we get a budget increase for that as well. The solar farm tax isn't really a budget increase, it's just adding it back in after everything else, because it does get subtracted each year. We have to subtract replacements each year, so you see a minus right there, and we might have some other subtractions going on. Like Alan mentioned earlier, we covered homeowners exemptions in our district. That would be extra revenue that we received that we would then use to reduce our property tax amount. And then the last thing that we could take as an increase is foregone amounts. That is discretionary for you on whether you need that in that year. And then what you're left with is the maximum property tax. So that's a simple view, top to bottom, of what these calculations are trying to do, but we need to talk about those things in more detail, okay? So the right side of the table really is trying to drill down into what these things mean. When we said prior budget, we don't just mean last year, and we don't mean your whole property or your whole budget, right? We mean the non-exempt property tax portion of the budget, and we're talking about a 3-year time frame, so that if you want to reduce your property tax amount in 1 year, it doesn't immediately hurt you next year. You can go back and look at the last 3 years, and we have lots of districts do that, so that they can reduce the tax whenever they can. You know, that is a popular thing to do for sure. And we also talk about including replacements, because we say that we're required to subtract property tax replacements each year. But if we were not allowed to add those back in right here, then we'd be getting our 3% increase off of a smaller number. And that does kind of hurt us. So the design of the replacements was to try and keep those exemptions from hurting us. So we're allowed to add it back in when we do this 3% calculation. And Alan did say it earlier that when we say 3%, we're really just trying to help you understand the maximum. We're not saying you have to take 3%. We'll talk later about how the L2 allows you to set it less than 3%, but we're going to say 3% a lot here. Okay, so the next component after we take the highest of the last 3 years plus 3% plus replacements is then new construction. So that's a budget increase where we take 90% of the value and multiply it by a preliminary levy rate. And I put an asterisk there because if you're a fire or ambulance district, you're no longer using preliminary levy rates. We talked about that a second ago. You're using the prior year's levy rate. Everybody else is using a preliminary levy rate. And that gives you a budget increase for that. The similar sort of thing happens with annexations. You get credit for 90% of the value multiplied by a rate. That gives you your budget dollars. Expiring urban renewal is similar. Most of the time you get credit for 80% of that. There are some situations with older urban renewals where you might get credit for 90% of it. The same sort of thing where you multiply values by a rate to get a budget increase for yourself. I talked a little bit about the solar farm tax before, mostly since it's required to be subtracted each year, but it's not allowed to be treated like a replacement where you add it back in at the beginning for the 3%. So we have to add it back in later. And that's the only reason it shows up in the middle of this table here. You get to add it back in to do these calculations, but after all those other calculations have been done. Then we have to start doing the subtractions that we talked about. Things we have to show are reducing our property tax. Those property tax replacements are the most common. And we have that new addition this year of the estimates for the kilowatt hour therms tax. Those need to be shown as being reducing our property tax. We said there are some other subtractions. That's where solar farm might fit in. That's where the recovered homeowners might fit in. There could be other things that you could subtract there too. And then you get to make that decision on whether you want to recover foregone amounts into your budget, do that resolution. Shelley, did you have a question?
On the urban renewal, it says expiring urban renewal, but what if you're opting out? Is it still the 80%?
Really good question. So opting out of an urban renewal is treated the same way as one that expires. It's sort of expiring for you. So yeah, we say expiring, we're terminating, and opting out would be within that same realm. Yes. So the calculations all work the same, but I think the law is less clear about whether you get credit for 80% or 90%. It depends on the age of both the district and the urban renewal. So we would have to look at it on a case-by-case basis because it's complicated. So either 80 or 90%, but we'd have to look at it for you. Okay. Okay, and then we get to the very bottom. And the precise language is maximum non-exempt property tax that we can levy. Okay. So that's the whole process top to bottom, but we can even drill down into the beginning of that table a little bit more to make sure we know what we're talking about when we say the 3% increase, because it's 3% off of what is the most common question there. So I set up a table here, and at the top row of this table, it's the levied amounts in property tax for this district for the last 3 years. But we know that the amount that we levy is affected by those other things that we have to subtract. But some of those we're allowed to add back in. So that's what this table is really showing, is which of those things are we allowed to add back in, and how do those play into this when we say we get a 3% increase. So the ag equipment replacements tend to be pretty small, but also consistent. So I'm going to add in $28 for each of the last 3 years. Personal property replacements tend to be a little bit larger and also are usually consistent. You might have seen an adjustment for your district in 2024. If you are a city or highway district, most everyone else should have had consistency in the amounts that they're getting for that. Recovered homeowners exemptions, Alan talked about how those are inconsistent. Depends on what the county finds. If they find someone with a homeowner's exemption that shouldn't have it, they'll collect that money, pass it along to districts like you, and then you should subtract it. In my example here, I got a little bit more in 2024 with that $110. So I'll be adding it back in because it had been subtracted that year. But in 2025, there was nothing to subtract, so there's nothing to add back in. So when I get to the very bottom, I've added back in all those things that had been subtracted in those years, and then I get to pick the highest of the last 3 years from that bottom row of the table. So that there is what I multiply by 3%. I take the 137, multiply by 3%, and I'm just a little bit less than 142,000 for my budget. The last 3 years increased by 3%. The next step after that in that process talks about preliminary levy rates. Now, I know you've got a lot of fire districts in the room. You can kind of sit back and relax during this section because this no longer applies to you. We don't have any ambulance districts or any ambulance districts, but they would be in the same boat. Everyone else, cities, counties, highway districts, cemeteries, libraries, hospitals, everyone else, recreation, it's all still using preliminary levy rates to calculate your new construction increases. So the intent of these things is to try and get a little bit more accuracy relative to using last year's levy rate. And obviously that does make timing a little more difficult because you know last year's levy rate much earlier than you're able to figure out your preliminary levy rate. But that's what it's trying to do. So we're going to take that preliminary levy rate, multiply it by these values for new construction and annexation after we reduce them that little bit down to 90%. And that's how we get our budget increases for the year. We're mentioning again, percent cap increases, because if you're not fire and ambulance, you're still within an 8% cap for the year. So if you have a lot of new construction, a lot of annexations going on, you might run up against that 8% cap. That has been a problem for certain districts in this area as well over the last few years. And we also mentioned terminating urban renewal, or that includes opting out of urban renewal. There are budget increases there that would be allowed to exceed the percent caps. Let's look at an example of a preliminary levy rate, how it would be calculated. We talked a little bit before about how we would do the highest of the last 3 years, and we would include replacements and add 3%. We could always do it with less than 3%, but we're talking purely maximum for this conversation. So let's do that, and we'll divide that by the current year's locally assessed value, because that's available in time to do this calculation. But last year's operating property value, because we won't have that in time. Operating property values won't be finalized and released until early September. So you're probably doing this calculation in July or August and don't have that number available to you. So the most current you can use as estimate of what this year's will be is just using last year. So I have some numbers on the bottom of the screen. As an example, we like to keep things as simple as we can. So let's say $1 million is our budget for the last 3 years. 3% increase off of $1 million is going to be $30,000. Okay, so that becomes the numerator in this little calculation. Then we have the current year's net taxable value of $400 million and last year's operating property value of $470,000. We don't have those values by ourselves. We get them from the county, right? So we divide those across and it gives us this new construction rate, preliminary levy rate of 00257. So the L2 form is going to do this for you and you're going to see it. I'll show you where it pops up in the L2 form, but you need to know, okay, what's it doing with that now? I see it. What does it mean? Next, it's going to multiply that rate by the new construction value. And that gives you a budget number, okay, that you're getting. So I carried over from the previous page that rate 00257. And the assessor tells me that 90% of my new construction this year is 19.4 million. I've got on the bottom of the slide. So I multiply those across and I'm just $1 shy of hitting $50,000. Now, if I'm in a district that's capped at 8%, I'm maybe planning to take my 3% base increase. I know I've only got a 5% increase max that I could take for new construction. 5% of $1 million is $50,000. I came out just underneath that 8% cap. And in this example, I don't lose anything to the 8% cap. Okay. I have another example here with some different numbers. If you feel like refreshing later on and want to go through an example with some different numbers, feel free. We're not going to take the time to go through all of these examples here today, but I just want you to have another example of how that's done in the L2 form so you can track and make sure you understand that. We'll move right along into talking about annexations because the processes and logic is really similar with just a minor discrepancy here. When you annex in property, you're mostly annexing in things that the county assessor is assigning values to. But there are going to be some things that they don't value, like power lines is the most common, right? So that's operating property value, and you might not know about that property value when you did that annexation, when you did your L2. You might not find out about it until after it's been submitted to the county, because those operating property values come out in September. So there is that little addition of annexed operating property value that makes up this calculation a little bit different from the new construction. So you'll see in some of these explanations here that the formula looks the same, where you take the budget from the last 3 years, divide it by the current year's value, plus operating property from last year, and then we try and account for that annexed operating property value as well. But the logic is the same, trying to estimate what it costs your district to service the territory that was already there and give you a budget increase at that same rate for what you were already servicing. So exact same process. I think we want to reiterate here that since this is within the 8% cap, sometimes districts talk about some pretty large annexations, and they might also be in an area with a lot of new construction. Just need to be aware that that could butt you up against your percent cap. If you have an 8% cap and you're considering adding 20% value to your district, just know what that could do to the budget increase. You could end up capped. So we're just trying to make sure that is understood here. Just like with the new construction, I do want to show you a slide with all of a good example of different numbers. I'm not going to go through it in depth, but this is what the L2 form is doing for you. So we can appreciate the behind the scenes calculations. But if you want to go get an explanation and an understanding of how this works, you can revisit this slide later on. And now the preliminary levy rates shown in the L2 worksheet. This is the part of the L2 where it is going to calculate this out and show it to you. So I've circled on line 5 where it's calculating out that new construction preliminary levy rate. And I've said in this example that I was a city, so I do have a preliminary levy rate. But if I'm a fire district, I want to look at it like this, because you can see it has eliminated some of those things that calculate out the preliminary levy rate. And instead, it's just giving me last year's levy rate, okay? But do feel free to check that and make sure that we put in the correct levy rate for your district, whether it's last year's or a preliminary rate. Okay, before we move on, are there any questions about preliminary levy rates or anything else we've covered up to this point? Okay. When we talk about foregone amounts, I like to put my picture of a confused owl here. Foregone amounts are one of the most confusing conversations that we can have and widely misunderstood topics. So we'll look at the definition here that says the amount of a previously allowable increase. And I add italics there because we're going to have to talk about that language very precisely in a second here. So an increase that in our budget that we are not taking. For example, after last year, our highest of the last year's budget was $100,000. Let's try and keep the example simple and say that that already includes replacements and we don't have any new construction or annexation to talk about. That then makes our calculations for 2026 a little more straightforward. We just get a 3% increase. So 3% of $100,000 means that our budget maximum for 2026 would be $103,000. Okay, so now I work for this district or I'm running the district and I'm going to go do my budget. I figure out that my budget needs to be $102,000 for 2026. That's $1,000 less. That's 1% increase that I'm not taking. So that's the foregone increase that I could reserve. I'm going to go do a resolution in a public hearing and make sure that I reserve that if I want to. I don't have to though. I guess I should say that as well. I could also say, hey, we didn't want to take our full increase and that $1,000, we're not going to reserve it. We'll never tax it on you in the future. It's a little bit of a different message, right? Versus we didn't take the increase this year, but we might need to tax it on you later. So we're going to reserve our right to do that in the future. That exact conversation about we didn't take the increase but we want to reserve it for the future. That is what the fire and ambulance districts are no longer allowed to do. Alan said that earlier during the legislation. Let's look at a little bit of a different example where we complicate things a bit. All the same starting numbers where the budget from last year was $100,000. So our maximum for 2026 is going to be $103,000. But then when I go to do the budget, I say we actually only need $90,000 in property tax this year. So the difference between what I'm going to ask for and my maximum is 13,000. But that doesn't mean that that's what I can reserve in foregone, because remember the definition of foregone said the previously allowable increases. So those increases are the 3% in the new construction and the annexation. So I can only reserve the 3% that I'm not taking. That's why the correct answer here is I can reserve $3,000 in foregone and not 13,000. Okay. Some more things to know about foregone. It does not expire. And I like to also add to that, it only changes if you do a resolution to change it. If you're adding to it because you didn't use your full increase this year, then you can add to it with a resolution. If you need to take away and include it in your budget this year, it needs a resolution. Unless you do those resolutions, it should stay there on the books on a report that I will show you on our website. Okay. So it does not expire. It does not change unless you actively do a resolution to change it. If you are including it in your budget, that's the resolution to recover that I have on this screen here. You're increasing your property tax amount. The resolution needs to be included and submitted to the county with the L2, because you're saying I need extra property tax. So you just need to show the county that you've done the steps to do that. Okay. It also says you must list a specific purpose. That's directly out of statute. It says you must specify a dollar amount and a specific purpose. So maybe we need to build something or repave the sidewalk. I don't know. We redid the floor in our building. Just a specific purpose, whatever that means to you. The other option is if you don't take the full increase, you might reserve the increase you didn't take. That resolution is just due before the year ends. So we're really just trying to avoid a conversation where somebody says, I think in 2015 we didn't take our full increase. Can we go reserve that now? No, let's cut this off at the end of the year. Okay, let's draw that line in the sand and say we can't be talking about foregone increases after the tax year has ended. Okay. Okay, let's move on to talking about recovering it and the limitations that are in place there. Fire and ambulance districts can still do this part. If you have an outstanding foregone balance and you want to include it in your budget, you can still do this. So everyone in the room, this does apply to. You have the limitation of an extra 1% increase on top of the 3% that everyone's allowed. You can take an extra 1% for general purposes. Maybe that's a general fund, a maintenance and operations levy, current expense levy, something like that. That'll be a ongoing budget increase. It'll contribute to next year and the year after. Okay. Can't go over an extra 1% though. The other option you could go is a more temporary route for something that the statute calls capital projects. We used to show the definition of capital projects from the statute on the screen here. Didn't really feel like that was super helpful. I can tell you where it is, but just know that I can't tell you what a capital project is. So you need to read the statute to see if the thing that you're considering is considered a capital project. So since these are temporary increases, that means that you're going to collect the property tax this year and people are paying that and it comes away from your foregone balance. But next year, when we're doing all those calculations for the 3% and everything, this just isn't included in those calculations. That's all that means. So even though you do bill it and it is paid in property tax, it doesn't contribute to the calculations for following years. Okay, and the last note is just that these percent caps, the 8%, 15%, do not cover foregone amounts. We've said that a couple times, but that is something that people ask all the time, so we want to make sure we say it a few times. The percent caps do not apply to foregone amounts. Okay, we have another example here. In this example, I have similar numbers from before, and I know that my district has saved up a foregone balance of $5,000 over the last, I don't know, maybe my district has existed for 25 years. And that's how it's built up to, and now I have $5,000 available to me. Okay, so for my budget this year, I know my highest last 3 years was 100,000. We've got 3% that we're planning to take, and we have a lot of new construction going on this year. So we're gonna hit that 8% cap at $108,000. Maybe we need a little bit more when we looked at our budget, and we want to consider using foregone amounts to get above the 8% cap. If I go to the left, let me see if I can bring up a laser pointer. If I go to the left side of the screen, I'm saying we really need our budget increase to be permanent. We don't think we have any capital projects. Let's really just talk about increasing our budget by an extra 1%. So we would multiply the 1% by the $108,000, and we could take up to $1,080. Okay, we have $5,000 available to us. We could take 1,000 of it in this year if we wanted to. And then next year, when I'm doing all the calculations for highest of the last 3 years and all those things, then I would be able to take that 109,080 that would contribute to next year. Okay, since that's a permanent increase. The other route we could go on the right side is saying, well, actually, the things that we need extra money for are not permanent. We just need to fix something or build something or whatever. We think it's a capital project. And so we can take an extra 3% of that 108,000. And maybe this year we'll levy 111,000. Again, I've got 5,000 available to us. That's going to use about $3,200 of that 5,000. But it's not going to contribute to next year. Even though I'm going to collect $111,000 in property tax this year, next year when we're doing all those calculations, the 108,000 is the number that we're going to use, because that was just a temporary property tax increase that we're not contributing to the ongoing property tax. The last route is maybe doing both of them at the same time. Okay, if you have something permanent you need extra money for, you have something capital project you need extra money for, you could get an extra 4% on top of that 8%, putting us up at a 12% increase from last year, and that is legal. Okay. It's important to know that in that case, I'm multiplying the 4% by the 108,000, and it comes out to about $4,300. Now, I only have $5,000 built up. Remember at the top? So I'm using almost all of my foregone balance. I just need to be aware of that. There's only going to be about $700 left of my foregone balance moving forward. So I just need to know that. And then the other thing I need to keep in mind is, even though I'm going to receive $112,000 this year, what's going to contribute to my budget next year? Only the 1%, the $109,000. Okay. So that's what we'll be talking about next year when we're doing those calculations. We're talking about highest the last 3 years. It's going to be referring to the 109 that had used the 1%. And everything that was related to the capital project is not part of that conversation. Okay.
I was going to mention one thing here.
Sure.
Because some of you look at your foregone balances and say, wow, that's accrued this number, over so many decades or years or whatever. And I'd like to show perhaps my public a little more frugality. I'm not going to scare them, even at only taking 1% budget increase or 3 or whatever. I don't want to imply that I might do that. So I want to get rid of some of it. You can't do that. You can get rid of it by doing this. You can get rid of it by pulling it into your budget, but you can't otherwise just eliminate it. If you've got $1 million on the books and you go, yeah, okay, that's just a weird number and I'm not going to be able to really use that very effectively, or even maybe want it out there, but there is no way to do that.
Yeah, I left that out. That's a good thing, that you cannot, we don't know of a mechanism in law to wipe out your foregone balance. You can use it or add to it, but we don't think there's a way to wipe it out. So I have a flow chart here because there's sometimes confusion surrounding the situation of recovering foregone, increasing your budget this year, and then reserving increase this year that you're not taking. And I see some districts try and do both resolutions for both of them in the same year. And I really want to show and make it clear, hopefully with this flow chart, as to why you really should end up in one vote or the other. And it doesn't really make sense to be doing both in the same year. Okay, so let's start at the top where we did the calculations for the maximum property tax budget, and we're comparing that to the property tax budget that we think we need. So we ask ourselves first, are we going to be below the max? If the answer is yes, then the next question is, do we want to reserve the increase that we are foregoing? If we say yes, then that's where we do the first resolution, okay? We didn't take our full increase, we want to reserve it. All we have to make sure we do is we do it in a public hearing and we say how much we're reserving. So that's kind of a key feature I don't think I've mentioned yet. Stating the dollar amount is required in statute. And think about it this way. If I'm a taxpayer and I see the publication that you want to reserve a foregone amount, but all it says is Library District A is going to reserve our foregone increase for this year. And we'll have a hearing for it in 10 days. I don't necessarily know if I want to show up to that hearing because you didn't tell me if it's $10 or $10,000 or $1 million. You know, I might want to go to the hearing and hear what you have to say if we're talking about $1 million increase that you want to save and maybe tax on me in the future. But if it's $100, I'm saying, okay, fine, you go ahead and reserve that. I don't need to show up for that. Okay, so stating the dollar amount in that resolution is really important. We have had to turn back some resolutions from some districts that did not specify how much they were trying to reserve. If we ask ourselves, do we want to reserve the foregone increase? And the answer is no. So that is kind of a different message, right? I didn't take my district's full increase that it was allowed this year, and I'm never going to tax that on you. All I do there is just don't do the resolution. If I take no action and I do no resolution, then the foregone increase from this year gets lost. But the foregone balance I already had, if I already had $5,000 in foregone balance, that's untouched, okay? If I don't do that resolution, the $5,000 that I already had as a foregone balance is unchanged. Let's go back to the first question, which was, are we below the property tax maximum? Let's say the answer is no, we're either at that maximum or we need to go higher. So then the question is, do we need to recover previously foregone amounts? We need to go higher. Maybe the answer is no, because we're just okay with the maximum. So that's the bottom right of this flow chart, and that's the simplest situation, because if we calculate the maximum and that aligned with the property tax that we were looking for, then we do no resolutions. There's nothing really to talk about with foregone. If I have a $5,000 foregone balance, I do nothing and it stays there. But if I do need to go higher than that maximum, then I might want to talk about recovering previously foregone amounts, and I might need to do a resolution here. So I need to state a dollar amount and a purpose. I need to have a hearing. We've talked a little bit about the requirements for that, but that would be a very different scenario from the other one where we would be doing a resolution. Any questions about this flow chart or foregone amounts in general? We're almost done. Carrie, you have a question?
Top, is it yes on the left, no on the right, and then yes, no?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't make it super clear. But the check marks were supposed to be the yeses on this, and the X's were supposed to be no's. That's what I was trying to indicate, but I could have used Y or N or I don't know. I could have done it differently, but okay. I have one more slide, I think, related to foregone. I think we're growing weary of foregone, but I just wanted to show you an example of what a resolution looks like. This is an example of a library district that just wants to reserve the current year's foregone increase. So they didn't take their full increase and they say they want to reserve $500 for the future. They've met the notice and hearing requirements. It's pretty short and sweet, but it meets those requirements that are there. Notice at the bottom of the page that some districts are required to hold annual budget hearings, but not all of them are. Resolutions still need to be done regardless of what your budget publication requirements are. Whether you have to hold a budget hearing for your district, the resolutions still need to be done in a public hearing, okay? So if you have a requirement to hold a budget hearing, you might do it at the same time, doesn't have to, but this is what the statute says, that the resolution still needs to be done in a public hearing, okay? All right, that's the last note I have about foregone. Do we feel okay about it? Because I will quiz you. Okay, just like the first one, we just have a short quiz. I think it's maybe 3 questions, mostly related to foregone, and see how we feel about that. We'll talk about the answers in just a minute.
This is that one. We have this. Oh. Let's get to one.
All right, looks like I've got 29 responses here. It doesn't quite want to load normally here, but first question said true or false. Foregone amounts can allow a district to increase its non-exempt property tax budget more than the normal cap, which is 8% for most districts or 15% for fire and ambulance. It really isn't showing up very well. But that answer is true, and most of us got that right. 86% of us got that right. Remember that 8% cap applies to the 3% increase plus new construction and annexation. Only those 3 things. So that does mean that foregone would allow you to go above that. Maybe if I turn off my laser pointer, it'll behave better. There we go. My district has $50,000 in foregone amounts that was reserved in previous years. We don't need to add it to our budget this year, but we want that $50,000 foregone balance available for the future. Do we need to complete a resolution this year? Most of us, 76% of us are correct. The answer is no. It doesn't change unless you do the resolution to change it. So if you go and do a resolution, it's unnecessary and that doesn't really mean anything because you're just choosing to take no action. With foregone, that $50,000 will still be there in the future. Do we have any questions about this? I see those resolutions all the time and I just want to save people the headache, really. Okay. So with that, we are at another 10-minute break. We'll come back in about 10 minutes to pick up our third and last section for today.
We don't know it. $2 million.
And so, yeah, I've been trying to.
We don't have any. That's what it says. Thank you. Now we sit in special subtraction. I mean, it seems to be intended towards a good reason. To try and determine how much you think tax dollars collected and whatever that looks like. We aren't going to be invested, but soon. Now, nobody ever bids. No, it's true. But yeah, it's very obviously just if you were looking at it like, well, look, we need for all figures. Expenses are split in the same proportion. It's a defense. Hey, my bad.
I appreciate it.
But
So you're kind of like reserving a right to collect it.
Somebody paying. Somebody's paying. Yeah, that's different.
John. So you go decide to tap into that, because then and it's sitting over there. It looks so it's just you have the right to ask it, but they think that you have to go. So it's not so many years. So it's just a way. Extra. It's extra, yeah, you're asking for extra, because we do all those calculations, when you're allowed the credit. Yeah, and so. It's I looked at all these calculations. Back to very. One of that. Anytime over the last year since we just keep tracking that amount on a spreadsheet, like you said, a 5 paper. Somebody has. All right, we're going to start our third and final section now. I think we're on a good timeline to still end at 4:30, so everybody can get out of here when they would like to. The last section today is about required forms. And included in those required forms is everybody's favorite, the L2 form, but we're going to talk about some other ones first. So when is information available to us? A lot of the information for taxing districts does come to you from the county clerk, but not all of it. The first one I will show here is an exception to that. It is not sent to you by your county clerk because it is on our website. I give you the link right here. This is our reports and statistics page, and we will look at how to find this in just a minute. But the maximum budget and foregone amounts worksheet is a really helpful report. If you don't know what your foregone balance is this year, or you can't remember it, you want to see, or maybe you think you know what it is, you want to see what I think it is, you want to compare the two. Same thing with budgets for the last 3 years. You know what your budgets were and you want to make sure we've got it right. So you check it on this report and you do that early in the year so that when those numbers go into the L2 form, there's no argument over whether the numbers are correct because you looked at them back earlier in the year, right? So we just want you to know where that is so you can review those numbers because we use those numbers in the L2 form to try and make it populate automatically and work more smoothly. So there's less headaches when you do that form. So things that do come to you from the county clerk, the first one will be that new construction roll value. Look for that around the 4th Monday in July. You're going to get taxable values as well as the new estimated kilowatt hour therms tax revenues by the 1st Monday in August. So that's your current year's values that the county assessor values. If they estimated any sub-roll, it's included there. And they might also tell you about last year's operating property value. And you could check to make sure that the L2 form populated that correctly for you. Annexation values, the main thing we want to point out here is that they do come in 2 parts. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. When you annex in new property, you have like a new subdivision that goes up. Most of that is locally assessed. So that's the homes and the land and whatnot. But there might be some part of it, generally a very small part, that is operating property that would be reported to you on a different timeline. So you see the 1st Monday in August is when you'll know about all the locally assessed stuff from your county assessor. Usually that's 95 to 99% of the annexation value. If you do have operating property that you're annexing, you'll not know about that until early September, and it might be a very, very small budget increase that you probably don't know about. At that point in time, your L2 form has probably already been submitted to the county, and so you might not have factored that in. I will tell you from having looked at thousands of L2s and made hundreds of these corrections, it's usually less than $10. Okay, so we don't want you to feel bad about not knowing about that number or getting it wrong, technically wrong, because you just didn't know about it in time to send it to your county. Okay, it's usually so small that it doesn't make a huge impact. We just want you to know technically there is this extra stuff. If you were going to do a resolution to reserve your foregone increase for the year, you could include that in it too. Okay, if it's an extra $5 and you're planning to do that resolution later in the year, then you could add that in there. Okay. So just know that there are 2 timelines there, and don't feel bad if the annexation value you put on the L2 gets fixed by a very small margin later on. So we have a list of property tax related forms, and the first one is the L2. That is the long name for the page where you fill in the budget request. It's going to have a property tax amount that you're signing off on and saying, this is what we need. Counties, please levy this for us. The next one is the L2 worksheet, and that's basically the one that does all of the calculations to show that the amount you're asking for is within the maximum. You did all the calculations. This is within the maximum. It's going to be part of the same Excel workbook and just shows that it is all legal in accordance with statute. The voter approved fund tracker. Alan showed you this a bit earlier. That was the one that if you have a bond or a temporary override, you would report that. But even if you don't have those things, we have that new question related to the kilowatt hour therms tax. That new question that Alan pointed to that says, did you levy for a bond in 2025 that has now expired? I need everyone to at least look at this page of the L2 workbook and put a yes or no. Nearly everyone will say no every single year. I'm just asking that you make sure that you don't skip that, please. So it does say if applicable here, but most of you, I think all of you, I would like to put in yes or no. You could just put no if you did not have a bond in 2025. I give you the web address here for the L2 forms, and that is directly to answer the question that I've gotten in the past where someone said, what's the deadline for the county to send me my L2 forms? I can't remember. Was that in your packet? It's because there is none. The county doesn't have to send you the L2 forms. They're provided by the tax commission. They're on our website right here. If the county doesn't send it to you, you have the responsibility to go find it or ask us for it, okay? So I do know that a lot of counties are very helpful and send the L2 form to you to make your life easier. And some of them also pre-fill some values that they got from their assessor to further make your life easier. Okay, so thank them for that because they don't have to do that. That is just them trying to help you. So if you don't get it from your county, here is where to find it. I will also show you on how to navigate our website to find it in just a few minutes here. I mentioned the maximum budget and foregone amounts worksheet just a second ago. We have that in a Power BI format on our website, just mentioning it in this list as well. And we talked a little bit earlier about recovered, recaptured property tax and refund list. That has things like solar farm tax, recovered homeowners exemptions, and potentially judgment refunds. There shouldn't be many of those going around anymore, but we had those a lot last year and the year before. This is what that form looks like. The judgment refunds are on the furthest right column. Hopefully those are less common now. Solar farm tax is going to be sort of common in this area. You should be getting this from your county clerk by the first Monday of August. If you haven't seen it by then, you might just double check with them and say, hey, is there anything on this form that relates to me that I need to know about? And if they say no, then that makes your L2 form just a little bit simpler as you go through the block of questions related to that form. So let's look at how to navigate our website, because I recognize that it can be really hard to find things. Alan and I have a hard time finding things every day. So, so there's 2 here that I've circled. The bottom right says reports and statistics. We'll pause and look at that in just a minute. But in the top, I have forms and guides. And that's actually just a little drop-down box that I can hover my mouse over. And if I hover over it, it shows all these options down below. And so I'm going to look in the bottom left of that drop-down box for property tax forms and guides. Then I can click that. And it brings me to that page, the property tax forms and guides. And you'll notice that the first forms listed here are the 2026 L2 forms. There are 2 of them there. There's a general form that nearly everyone here can use. I think everyone here. The only other version of the form is for counties that have a road and bridge fund that doesn't cover the whole county. That calculation is complicated and I had to make a different form to accommodate that. Everybody else can work within the general form. Okay, so if you want to go download the L2 form and start looking at it for this year, you can find your way to this page and do that. Or if you don't receive it from the county, you can certainly pull it from here. If we need to fix anything, we post them to this page. The other page I circled for you before was the reports and statistics page. So if you had clicked that from our home page, then it would bring you right here. This is a long page with lots of reports related to all sorts of different tax types. So I'm showing that if you scroll to near the bottom of it here, there's a section called property tax, budget, and levy. And that's where I post 3 reports each year. Let me bring up a laser pointer again. So the first one is the September values dashboard. Those are the values that we're going to use to set your levy rates each fall. That does get published in September. Fortunately, this one is named well. And we use those to set levy rates. The December values are the year-end values. And despite the name, this one doesn't get posted in December. This one gets posted in March because the deadline for them to submit their year-end values, the counties that is in early March. So we usually are waiting for some county to finish their values in early March, and then we post those shortly after. You might need to know about that if you're considering an election in May. You know, you want to do a new bond for a new fire station, or you need to run a temporary override or something. You might want to figure out the most current cost estimate for this new thing that you're doing the election on. And so you might pull the December values to do that. Or if those are not available in the time frame that you need them, you could certainly call the county or myself, and we'll try and figure out if we have current values to help you with that. Then the last one here is that maximum budget and foregone amounts for 2026. This page does have the budgets for the last 3 years, the replacements that we send you, solar farm tax amounts, your foregone balance is listed there. So please do familiarize yourself and know how to find your district on this report. I would very much like everyone to have found this page and checked the numbers for your district before you ever see an L2 form. Because all those numbers that we pre-fill in the L2 form come directly from this. And so if you disagree with any of them or you think that we made a mistake, I would much rather you bring that up earlier in the year. Okay, I mentioned this a little bit earlier that there are 2 kinds of L2 forms when we looked at that page. In the spreadsheet, the general form does change a lot based on the district's type that you tell it. So a school district sees a very different form from a city, and they see a very different form from a fire district, okay? So you might notice that you see a bunch of white space on the form as you're going through. That might be because those are questions relating to a different type of district, okay? That I'm hiding from you so that you don't get a headache for trying to figure out how to answer this question that doesn't actually relate to you. Okay, so with that being said, I autofill as many values as I think I can into the L2 form when you just pick the name of your district. I think I know what your budgets have been the last 3 years. I think I know what replacements you get paid each year, solar farm tax that gets reported, operating property value from last year. All of those numbers, I think I know, and I'm going to pre-fill just when you put in the name of your district. So click the right district name, please. And it sounds kind of silly, common sense, but the little box to pick the district, I can't adjust the size of it. I really wanted to make it bigger so you could read it easier and click the right one, but Excel doesn't let me do that. So I'm just giving you that word of caution. Every number in that form relies on you clicking the right district name, and some districts have names that look really similar, like cemetery number 1 and cemetery number 2. Just pause there because a lot rides on getting that step right. And you would hate to find out a month after the fact that you had done step 1 wrong. Okay, so that cautionary note out of the way. Most of you guys use the general form, and I don't think anyone here uses the special county with county road and bridge form. We need to talk about a rule that relates to L2s. One of the things that it says is that the L2, when you send it to the county, does need to be signed. You're asking for property tax and it needs to have a signature, but counties might have different signature requirements. I know some counties might prefer that you print something, physically sign it, and then let them scan that, or you scan it and send it to them. Okay, if that's their preference, then please play nice. Some of them might say, we've got your signature on file, so if I have an email from you, then I'll use the signature on file. They might use a different form of digital signature. Counties can have those preferences, and that's perfectly fine. Regardless of what their signature requirements are, outside of the rule, I am going to beg you that you send an Excel version that matches whatever you have signed. And that's because, as Ellen mentioned earlier, when all these get sent to the tax commission for review after the counties have looked at them, then I have about 3 to 3.5 weeks to review over 1,100 forms and every single number in those forms. I can't do that if it's all printouts. It's not possible. Okay, so I need to have the Excel version. I've built in some features into the background that let us extract those numbers, compare it to what we think they should be, and highlight things that we need to double check. Okay, so please, please, please make sure that there is an Excel version that matches whatever you've signed. Okay, the other thing the rule says is that, we've talked about this a little bit earlier, is that the budget request on the L2, the property tax amount you're asking for, cannot be more than you published when you published your budget in terms of property tax. So think of it this way. I published that I need X amount of property tax. I've created a ceiling for myself. I can come down from that when I fill out my L2, but if I want to go above that, I then need to redo that publication. Okay, so that's an important part of rule we need to remember. The last one should be fairly easy in the modern L2 form, subtracting all replacement monies. If you don't do that, it'll highlight things in red. If you see things that are highlighted red in the L2 and you don't understand why, reach out to your county or reach out to me. We can try and help you figure out what's going on there. Let's look at the L2 a little bit closer now. And we'll focus on things that are different, especially for this year. Because quite a bit of the legislation did affect the L2 form. Okay, so if you've never seen the L2 form before, this is one of the first pages that you'll see when you open it up. This is the L2 dashboard. It's designed to kind of work like TurboTax, where it'll ask you a question about, does this apply to you? No? Okay, I'll hide all those other things, okay? So it'll work from the top down and have you focus on green boxes and kind of hide things in white, as you see on this slide here, if I don't think it applies to you or it doesn't apply yet. So you'll focus on the green boxes. The first green box you see when you open this up asks about user type. Am I a taxing district rep or a county clerk? So if I represent the taxing district, I'm not going to change that box. The only purpose that box serves is to save you from another headache. Because the county clerk calculates your levy rates and you don't have the tools to do that, the information. And so I don't want you to even see that page that calculates levy rates because you're just going to worry about how to do it. And you can't do it, okay? So when you open this up, it'll say taxing district rep. You don't need to change it. The county will change that when they need to calculate your levy rates later, okay? So skip past that one. The first one you do need to answer then is, what type of county am I in? If you're in multiple counties, pick any of them. It shouldn't make a difference, okay? So if you're Avamore, you could pick Gem, Boise, and Ada, right? Are those, did I get the 3 counties right? It should pop up in the list of all 3 of those. So I'll work my way down, and as I answer those questions, it'll uncover another green box down below, and I'll keep working from the top down, answering the questions that apply to me. So in this example, I said that I was in Ada County and I am a city, and then I selected from the list of cities in Ada County and said I'm the city of Meridian. The biggest new feature that I'm pointing to for you here is this box about compliance with the state controller's local registry. I wanted to add some information to the L2 for you about how this affects your property tax budget, but I didn't really want it to add any work or extra steps for you. So when you open this up, it's going to be defaulted to just say yes. And if you never have problems with complying with the controller's office, you don't have to do anything. You can just skip right past it and ignore it. But if you're one of those districts that has a hard time making sure you're compliant and you want to know what that does to your property tax budget, then you can flip back and forth between yes and no and look at what that does to the calculations. We'll look at it a little bit more in a second, but the calculations of your maximum will get changed because there is that penalty to your property tax if you're not in compliance. So I wanted to add an informational tool without adding extra work, and hopefully this accomplishes that for you, okay? Then after that, let's see if I have my laser pointer back. You'll notice that there is a 3% pre-filled into this box for me. And that's because we see the purpose of the L2 form is to help you understand what the maximum property tax is. So you can always do that calculation with less than 3%. If I'm in the L2 form right now, I could type in 2.75%. If that's what I want my factor to be for my percent budget increase, I can do that. And I have districts each year that are very precise on what they want that increase to be. Okay, certainly do that. But for the purposes of understanding the true maximum, I could just leave it at 3% and skip right past, okay? Because even though the form tells me that my maximum is $1 million, I don't have to levy $1 million. You know, I'm going to do my budget separately, right? So I just want to understand that it will be pre-filled at 3%, but you can change that downwards if you want to do the calculation with a lesser percent base increase. So then the next questions I'm looking at are the current year's values. I'll get those from the county clerk. Then I have the new construction roll that the county clerk gets from the assessor and sends to me. It's already been reported at 90%, so I don't have to do any sort of arithmetic to adjust that, anything like that. I'm just going to straight put that number directly into the green box. It asks then if we had annexation value reported this year. So if I did an annexation last year, I will get annexation values reported this year to give me a budget increase, okay? So remember, that's how that timeline works. And then if you are a fire or library district, then there are two parts to that question. Once you say that you had annexation value, is it the stuff that's capped or is it the stuff that goes beyond the cap? Okay. So if you're not sure, then ask the county assessor or ask us, and we'll get to the bottom of which bucket that belongs in. So as I work my way further down this form, I just uncover more and more boxes. And I think in this example, I said I was a city, so I'm seeing boxes that relate to cities. And there's some things that are whited out because they didn't relate to cities here. There is this block in the bottom of this screenshot related to that recovered, recaptured property tax and refund list. If you don't have any of those things like solar farm or covered homeowners, then you just answer no and just keep on rolling through the form. If you did have solar farm tax, you would say yes, and it would ask you how much, and you would take the number straight from that form that we showed you earlier, the really nice yellow form that was really visually appealing, right? You would take those numbers straight from that form and put them right into that box. This is a little bit further down. This page has gotten a little bit longer over the last couple of years. The bottom of this page has a couple things that are new. And one thing we talked about earlier with the kilowatt hour therms tax, you need to show and subtract out the estimated revenues. Now, this first box that I'm showing you here doesn't automatically do any subtraction. I'm just asking you to tell me what those estimates are so that when you go do the budget in the next step, that I can help you balance, okay? Because if you don't account for that when you do the budget, then I want to highlight it red to let you know that something was wrong there, okay? So this is just helping you balance when you do the budget page. If you put it in there, you'll also notice that it shows up in the bottom table of calculations, because this is the bottom table is really trying to help you understand how the amount that you levy in property tax changes from last year to this year. Or more correctly, from the highest of the last 3 years to this year. And since this new kilowatt hour therms tax is something that you are required to subtract every year moving forward, and this is the first year, everyone that gets any of that money is going to see a -% there. Now, don't panic and think that your budget is being hurt by that. it's just coming from something that's not property tax, right? We're calling it a property tax replacement. So it's coming from sales tax rather than, or from the kilowatt hour tax, I should say, rather than property tax. But it will show up as a -% on the amount that you're actually levying in property tax because it's been moved out of property tax. So we just wanted to add that as information for everyone, because you're gonna look at those calculations and say, hey, I was allowed a 3% increase and I took another almost 4% from foregone. How did I end up only 1.5% up from last year? Did you rob me? What happened? This doesn't feel right. Well, we need to know that we lost a little over 5.5% that got shifted out of our property tax. Okay, so trying to add information so you understand those changes there. And I don't want to skip past the foregone that's in the center there, because that is a crucial component. Even if you're a fire and ambulance district, you can still include previously foregone amounts in your budget this year. So you'll notice the white box there lists out the district's existing foregone balance. So what we think your foregone balance is. Then I'm going to ask you, do you want to use that foregone balance and increase your budget this year? You say yes or no. If you say yes, which I did in this screen, then it's going to give me 2 more white boxes. It's going to say, okay, if you want to use foregone, here's the maximum to do for the permanent 1% maintenance and operations. And here's the maximum for the 3% capital projects. What do you want? And the 3 boxes that are in, or I'm sorry, the 2 green boxes that are below those, are you telling me what you would like for your district? So in this example, it calculates a maximum for the 1% permanent increase at $22,709. And I said, okay, we're going to take $22,000 for a permanent M&O increase. Okay. It calculated out 68,000, and we said we're going to take 67,000 for capital projects. So I don't have to take the maximum, but that is what we decided to take. We did that with a resolution. And then in the table down below, it shows what those percentages mathed out to as well. Okay, I've covered a lot of stuff. Does anybody have any questions? They want me to go back on something?
And one thing, if they had entered the wrong number, like on that, you know, the 1% of the maintenance and operations, let's say they entered 23,000 by mistake, would it show up red?
If you try to put in a number in that green box, Alan's referring to this box that I'm pointing to right here. If you try to put in a number that's greater than 22,709, I programmed it to give you an error message. It will not let you do that. It'll say something like the amount you're asking for is greater than 1%. And so you have to be within the box above, something to that effect. So it will not let you put in a number higher than that maximum. So just make sure that you're within that. Yes.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were going to get some kind of credit? I mean, if we have to be paying, I don't know how, I mean, wouldn't we already know that?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase your question?
Well, I don't understand the firm's piece, and I'm just trying to figure out, wouldn't we already know in our district that, you know, there would be something that we would be getting from them?
You will find out, excuse me, with the kilowatt hour thermostats, you will find out in the first week of August, the estimated revenues. Those revenues won't actually come to you until the following January. Thank you, Jared.
It's blended in to, you know, you're getting all these different people. I pay, Idaho Power pays, you know, different people pay tax to the county, and then it gets, your share gets, you know, distributed to them. So I don't know that it's further identified in the past as to how much. That's what Jared is working with the companies and everything to establish right now, based on last year's reports. And then those reports will just do percentages, the actual dollar amounts, you know, they'll give you estimated amounts. but the actual dollar amounts won't come out until next January. Yeah, so there's no way we know right now. Yeah.
Okay, does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. The next page after, we were just talking about the dashboard page of the L2, and the next page that follows that is the L2 worksheet page. This is, you'll notice there are no green boxes on this page as we look through it from top to bottom. Everything is white with a little bit of yellow or that's kind of a different shade of yellow highlighting. And that means that you don't have to put anything into this box, but all the calculations are being done here. So this first table that you're seeing looks just like the tables that we were talking about in our examples earlier with the budgets from the last 3 years. We have the first row that is things that we levied, and then we know that that was reduced by things that we had subtracted, and some of those were allowed to add back in. So that's what this table is doing. It's adding back in those things that had been subtracted from those years, so we can pick out which one was the highest of the last 3 years, and then we can start doing the calculations that follow that. So that's what this first table is trying to do. And then the line 1 down below is just pulling that highest of the last 3 years from the table above. And then it goes through all the calculations that we've talked about before, with first block being related to new construction. We do all those calculations with that preliminary levy rate shown on line 5, and we get an actual budget increase shown on line 7. So 1894 is the budget increase that I'm getting in this example for the new construction that occurred in my district last year. I did an annexation as well, so there's a little bit of a calculation for what I get there. I get a little less than $800 for the annexation that we did here. On line 15, it's at the bottom of this screenshot, would be any effect of the 8% cap. If I ran into the 8% cap or 15% if I'm a fire district, then I would see a negative adjustment to the maximum here. This is the bottom half of that page. This goes through the rest of the calculations. We get expiring urban renewal, which would also include opting out if we did that. Then we have all those things that we're required to subtract that are making up a large part of this. We do point here to the new kilowatt hour therms tax that's being included in the block of property tax replacements. So you're being asked to show how those are reducing your property tax. And then ultimately you're left with the very bottom line, which is what you're allowed to actually levy in property tax. That number on the bottom, line 41, gets carried straight over to the budget page, the very next page on that line there that I'm pointing to. And that says that everything in this top section, the non-exempt section up above, can't add up to more property tax than that. And so it calculated out at 2.143 million, and I requested a budget of 2.14. Okay. So that was by filling in my total approved budget, all my expenses in column 2. And then if I had any of these other revenue sources in 3, 4, 5, I would show those. Now, column 5 is my replacements. Those are things that I did list out on these pages here too. 34, line 34 and 37. So those are those subtractions that we would be making here. 127,911 gets carried over and subtracted from my property tax there, and it does balance at the bottom of that column. In the bottom right, I want to point to some things related to foregone. There's a white box that says max reserved foregone, and in this example, it says $3,000, $3,032. So that is the form calculating out for me how much foregone I could reserve if I want to go do a resolution to reserve it this year. I still need to tell the form in the green box right below that whether we actually do want to go reserve foregone. Because remember, there's 2 courses of action there. We could choose to just let it go and tell our taxpayers we didn't levy that increase and we never want to levy it. Okay, leave the box blank if you want to do that. Then if you actually do want to reserve that for later and say we didn't take the increase this year, but we might want to take it in a future year, so we'll reserve that. Then put that 3,032 or any number less than that in the green box there. So when I see these, I'm going to look at that and say, okay, they said they wanted to reserve foregone. Let me see if they did a resolution. If you already did one, then I'm just gonna add that to your foregone balance and we're already done for the year. Way ahead of the game. A lot of districts don't have it done early in the year and they wait until November, December, and that's okay. But I can send a reminder to the county to send to you if you fill in this box and I say, hey, it looks like Library District A wants to reserve their foregone increase, but I haven't gotten a resolution yet and it's middle of November or end of November. A lot of times the county says, oh yeah, they need to make sure that's on their December agenda. Let me make sure that they get that. Okay, so nobody forgets about it. So it's just a little helpful reminder we can send out to you.
You want to mention the date? Says 25.
Yeah, on my screenshot here, the date says 25. The current L2 should say 2026 now. That was something that we taught in one of our first workshops this year. So my screenshot says 25 right on that spot, but the L2, if you were to open it, shouldn't say 25, it should say 26. The last foregone box I just want to show you is this other white box that says recovered foregone. That is directly carrying over any numbers that I would have put on the dashboard. Remember the form asked me, do I want to increase in my budget by recovering previously foregone amounts? And here I said 22,000 and 67,000. If I had used the same example here, those numbers would be populating that white box. But in this case, I chose to use an example that shows that I'm reserving foregone rather than recovering it. And so I should see a box that just initials at the bottom that just says, I understand what I'm supposed to do to reserve foregone or recover it, depending on which case you're in. And you're just initialing that you've done those correct steps. The bottom half of that form has a section for exempt funds, and I list in parentheses what exempt funds are. A lot of folks ask if tort fund is an exempt fund. It is not. The only exempt funds for this type of district are listed here in parentheses: bonds, overrides, and judgment funds. So a tort fund is not an exempt fund. Tort fund would have to go in that top section. Okay, but we talked a little bit before, Alan did, about judgment refund levies. When the valuation cases get settled and the refund needs to be issued to the taxpayer, the taxing districts that lose that money can levy to get it back in the following years. So that's what's happening right here. We call it a 63-1305 judgment. And I put in the amount that we're allowed to levy here, which was just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's how I tend to do my examples. Then the bottom of the form just has contact info. Please make sure that the person that's listed and signing this is somebody that's going to be available in October when there's questions about this. I grew up in rural Idaho. I know people that did here elk hunting for 3 weeks. That's probably not a good person to be the contact, okay? So please do make sure that that person is going to be available and they're not planning to go to Cancun in October, because we might have questions about this and need to talk to that person. So yeah. What needs to be submitted? Quick reminder, nothing is getting submitted to me. Okay, you are submitting to your counties. That is who you submit to. You are requesting the county to levy property tax, so that's who you submit to. The first one is the L2, and remember that it does need to be signed. However, they prefer that you do the signature. You need to send them your budget hearing publication so they can check to make sure that you asked for an amount that's within what you had published. The voter approved fund tracker, we talked about how that has that new question related to the kilowatt hour tax. Make sure that you submit that and put that little yes or no question. If you have a new voter approved fund, like you have a new bond, make sure that the county has a canvass of votes in the ballot language so that they can pass that along to me. And then my last note is just a reminder to please, please, please make sure you send an Excel file and it matches the version that you signed so that we can meet all of the deadlines related to reviewing L2s, levy rates, budgets, and getting property tax bills out. Okay, so that is the end of my prepared slides. Do we have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Or does Alan have anything to jump in that I skipped? Okay, I have one last quiz. I'll give you a couple minutes to do this. I think this one might be 5 questions. So we'll give you a couple minutes to do this and we'll talk about the answers. All right, looks like I've got 28 responses. Let's talk about the 3 questions on this quiz. I said 5, but that was something else, I guess. 30 responses now. The first question said true or false. Districts that want to levy a judgment fund need to include it in their budget publication. 83% of us are correct. This one is true. The judgment refund levies are property tax. So that rule that was related to property tax on your budget publication in relation to the L2, that does apply here. So there have been some taxing districts that have not been allowed to levy their judgment refund because they did not publish it. So their county had to reduce it. So if you were one of those districts, make sure you get it right this year, because there is a 2-year window to levy judgment refunds. And you basically have one more try to do that correctly. Okay, so we want to make sure everyone knows that. When is the deadline in 2026 to submit the L2 form to your county clerk if you have not been granted an extension by the county commissioners? So this one is in your packet. About half of us were able to find that deadline is September 10th this year. It's a little bit later just the way the calendar works. It's usually a little bit early in September, but that's an important date for you to remember moving forward for this year, okay? Last one, true or false, the purpose of the L2 form is to calculate how much my district will levy in property tax this year. Now, I don't intend for this to be a trick question. But what we're trying to say here is the answer is false. The L2 is trying to help you understand maximums and then give you a place to submit your budget, okay? So you are the taxing district that determines your own budget. The L2 is helping you understand the maximum, and then you go determine your budget, okay? The L2 form is not trying to determine your budget or your property tax amount. It's just trying to help you understand the maximums. Not supposed to be a trick question, but I kind of get how it made you feel that way. Okay, so with that, we are at the end of our slides for today. Alan and I are going to stick around. He has some course evaluations he's going to pass around. If you don't mind sticking around for just a couple minutes, you can let us know how the workshop was. If there's anything else beneficial we could do to make it more helpful for you.
So I want to say also in conclusion, so please don't feel bad about contacting us at any of this or other material that comes up or whatever. We want to hear from you. We want to work with you. We do pride ourselves on one thing, and that is trying to be responsive and be there for you. We don't always have all the answers, but we'll We'll try our best. So do keep in touch. Don't be afraid to contact us by email, by phone, whatever. We'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. And we appreciate all the time you take on this as well. And there's a lot of stuff out there.
We appreciate everybody coming today. Big thank you to Jeff and Allison for helping out. Jeff has a box in the back for the course evaluations. You gotta collect them when you're done.
They're really fancy bucks too.
Thank you all for coming and giving us your afternoon, and please let us know if you have questions.
Yeah.
No one's.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, I guess.